Okay.
Privilege
Got
of
it.
What's that?
using the gavel. I don't know how you couldn't hear. That's the only perk, right?
The only person.
Let's be honest here.
Okay. I have Kelly, and I were emailing back and forth about some things. And I kind of disagree with her about some. She said, well, whatever you think, remember next year your chair.
That's right.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Boer, and I would like to welcome you to the May 18th, 2023 Design Review Committee meeting. This is a 9-person committee whose primary function is to perform design review for projects located in one of the city's 3 designated design review areas: downtown, the riverfront, and the new hotel overlay zoning districts. This is a mandatory review, voluntary compliance process with one exception for hotels seeking to skip council review. Hotels taking advantage of this incentive must receive a positive recommendation from the committee. All committee members and staff are now participating in person. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible and also linked on the community page. You can also watch the meeting on the city's YouTube channel, either live or recorded. I will now take roll call. Jeremy Goldstein is not present. Catherine Ankaya.
Hi.
Stephen Lee Johnson.
Present.
Thomas McLaughlin. Michael McDonough.
Here.
Brian Moffitt.
Here.
Robin Raines. Here. Ricardo Seco.
Here.
And we do have a quorum.
Yes.
And I would like to call for approval of the minutes from the April 2023 meeting.
Move they be approved.
A second.
The meeting minutes have been approved. And,
Or do you want to take a vote on that?
Yeah.
oh, take a vote,
Yeah.
okay.
All those in
All
favor?
in favor?
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And then the first project to review is the 68 Carter Street.
Good afternoon, everyone. Will Palmquist with Planning and Urban Design. I'll be presenting the staff report and recommendation for the project known as the Carter Street Mixed-Use Tribute Hotel, located at 68 Carter Street. This project was before you all at the April 20th DRC meeting, where it was continued to this meeting. I'll get into some of those discussion points and recommendations and changes. In the meantime, for this project, this is a level 2 hotel project that is a mandatory review, mandatory compliance, as they are seeking to bypass city council approval through the incentive program set up in the hotel overlay with the provision of hotel benefits prior to any issuance of certificates of occupancies. So that's why it is here before you. The project itself is located on 1.25 acres at 68 Carter Street. It spans Carter and across to Ann Street as well. It's currently a surface parking lot, formerly the parking lot for the Citizen Times. It's located around in between some existing social service delivery uses, such as A Hope Day Center to the south and the Salvation Army Center for Hope located to the north. It's in the downtown, so it's zoned CBD. It's located outside of the traditional downtown core and within the tallest height zone, and it is within the hotel overlay district that allows for small and large hotels. It does not have any frontages on key pedestrian streets. So I'm just going to flip down to the site plan. So essentially what's being proposed is a 8-story tall total maximum height building, which is mostly the section that fronts along Carter Street, and a 2-story tall section that fronts along Ann Street. It's a mixed-use building with 115 guest rooms, 24 residential units, and commercial space on the ground floor. There's also 165 structured parking spaces within 2 levels of parking below grade. You can see the vehicular access for the hotel use is off of Carter Street, and there's like an auto court valet area where folks would leave their car, and then it gets parked at the lower 2 levels. And then the residential parking access is off of Ann Street on the west side of the site. Let's see. I'm just going to go to the renderings and the elevation drawings. So, like I said, the project was before you all at the April 20th meeting. Let's flip down to some of the elevation drawings. So overall, there was a lot of discussion around the site itself, the streetscaping, the landscaping, and then the building design. I think the major points of discussion were that there is a lot of opportunity for green building technology to control stormwater runoff, to increase the quality and quantity, or increase the quality and reduce the quantity of stormwater runoff in the area, which has been a persistent problem in this section of downtown. Also, the opportunity to enhance the streetscape beyond minimum standards, such as the addition of more street trees and other, more specific placemaking design intentions. Talking about those 2 ideas, the applicant did provide an updated site plan, and there are additional street trees now located on Carter Street, where there are 9 large maturing trees proposed, where 7 were formerly proposed, and that's and is required. I believe the same number as last time on Ann Street, some additional street trees and other landscaping around the periphery of the site as well. They have not, as far as I can tell, incorporated any new stormwater techniques, but they might be able to speak a little more to that intention as well. They are here with us today. As far as the building design goes, there was a lot of talk about the front east elevation on Carter Street, which is shown here. The project has been revised to show the orientation of this kind of center mass where the adjacent to the main entrance and where the sign is proposed, which was formerly kind of reduced at the roof line and kind of closed in a revised version that was shown at the last meeting. And this version kind of restores that design to the original, which has that center element going all the way to the top roof of the project, per the suggestion of the committee at the last meeting. There's also some discussion about this 2-story retail space along Ann Street and how to make that something special, unique, and while it's part of the building on Carter Street, it's a separate use, and to try to signal the intention of that use through the design. And I think it's shown better in some renderings here. The applicant has kind of changed the proposed material along that frontage and elevation, and kind of, I guess, punched it out a little bit, for lack of a better word, so you can kind of see that that material is kind of coming out further from the building plane to kind of differentiate it from the rest of the building, and the material change as well to try to highlight that feature. So that's one change as well that was made since the last meeting. And then finally, there was a lot of discussion about the other side elevations, north and south. So the north elevation shown on the left and the south shown on the right. I believe the north elevation didn't have any windows proposed. Both elevations are right up against the property line, so the applicant was able to add some window openings there where it was possible due to the internal programming, and building code requirements. So the north elevation now has windows, where before it was pretty much empty of windows and other openings. And then the south elevation, some additional windows are added to the center section of the building where there were none before. So I believe those are that's the summation of the changes since the last meeting. As far as the review process, the project was reviewed and approved with conditions at the Technical Review Committee a couple months ago. So the project satisfies the requirements of the UDO. It's also supported generally in the downtown design guidelines as well, regarding things such as siting, height and massing. There are pedestrian entrances along the streets, and the elevations are compliant with openings and fenestration requirements as well. Therefore, staff recommends approval of this project, and I'm glad to answer any questions. We also have the applicant with us here this afternoon as well.
Well, there's some conversation about stormwater and plantings. Did you touch on that?
Yeah, a little bit. So you can see it better if I flip up to perhaps this site plan. So I think, as far as I can tell, and we can ask the applicant to delve a little more into this if they want, but there are some additional street trees along Carter Street. So there's 9 street trees instead of 7. Some additional trees around the perimeter of the site where it was possible to. They've highlighted some of the kind of green kind of terrace elements. Open lawns, planting areas over the parking that you can see here. So I believe that is the extent of it. They did not add a green roof or highlight any other stormwater management technologies besides those additional plantings and green kind of grass lawn areas.
So I heard they added a couple trees and something that was not previously plantings became plantings?
That's correct.
Which area was that?
I think it's these trees on the south elevation and some on the north in these sections of the building. I believe that is it. I think these areas were existing before, but they maybe weren't as highlighted, or perhaps I'm just seeing it now and noting it. We can ask them to kind of walk through some of those changes in more detail, but I believe that is the extent of it.
On that same drawing, on the southwest corner, but appears to be maybe a green shaded area that maybe it was a roof plaza that's now shaded green. What does it say?
It says
Lawn?
covered terrace with a lawn, and then lawn on the pool deck. I think that's part of the pool deck amenity of the
And that's
hotel.
on top of a parking deck, so
Correct.
theoretically that's a green roof, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if it's meets the exact definition. If it's going to depend on the type of drainage system. It's called a lawn, so it might just be grass planted on a concrete base, but it will definitely help to absorb stormwater. There's no doubt about that. I don't know if it meets the criteria of a green roof technically. And to be honest, that's not my forte, so I defer to other folks in the committee who might be a little more expert in that as to what would make a green roof versus just a lawn area. But
Now, if it's called lawn on the application, could it become astroturf or synthetic lawn without violating an approval?
yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be contingent on the zoning, so unless it was a very specific criteria of the approval, they could come with a synthetic application instead of actual grass, and that would still satisfy the zoning. It's not a requirement that it's lawn versus anything else. I know it's going to be impervious surface regardless, because it is over concrete, so that doesn't really change the stormwater regulation review of it necessarily. But yeah, it would kind of be up to them how they wanted to landscape it with what species of grass, or if they wanted to do astroturf or synthetic, that would be within the bounds of the zoning approval, unless it was a very specific element like a green roof that's shown, then that would be a different story.
So a requirement for a green roof is enforceable after it leaves here?
If it's shown on the plans as a building element, then that could be reviewed as part of the adopted plan set. I think if it says covered terrace and a lawn can mean, I think, a lot of different things, as you pointed out, so that wouldn't necessarily tie them into, necessarily having grass versus another synthetic material.
I mean, it seems to me it's an amenity for the pool deck. I don't know if the purpose of it is for stormwater or to improve the overall quality of that space. That might be a good question for the applicant.
Mm-hmm. And we can hear from them unless there's any questions for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Will the applicant
Applicant.
like to? If you want to scroll at all, it's just the two fingers to go up and down.
Okay.
You can zoom in and out down there as well.
Thank you. I'm Tony Hauser with WSP, representing this development. Thank you for your time today. I want to give you some history about this site. This has been a parking lot for the last 25 plus years for the Citizen Times, and it has never had any sort of stormwater control. About 4 or 5 years ago, somebody bought this parking lot and updated it a little bit and included some detention, which currently exists under that parking lot that's there right now. This development will be required to provide detention volume and treatment for what's currently under the parking area, as well as the additional impervious, if any. We haven't evaluated that fully yet, but if we have any additional impervious, we will also have to provide detention volume and water quality treatment for that additional runoff. The plan for the drainage on this development is that everything that falls on the building will be funneled into the parking garage and dealt with through that detention and treatment system in accordance with the requirements of UDO. So we plan to fully meet that. Speaking to the trees that have been added, we added 2 trees on Carter and 1 on Ann Street. We chose not to add any more because the spacing is now down to 18 feet in some cases, which is pretty close for even a medium-sized tree. We've added large, medium, and small trees on site, around the site, as Will pointed out. And this was to address concerns that were raised at the last meeting, to address tree canopy preservation requirements and to reduce our fee in lieu to about $60,000 on this project. Adding the trees was made possible in part by increasing the pervious area around the site, particularly on the north side and that area south of the building. Those additional trees and those green spaces assist or help with stormwater control, stormwater mitigation, because of interception. They don't provide any significant amount of detention. They do provide a little bit of treatment. But I would like to speak to the subject of green roofs because it's come up many times in the 2 meetings that we've been involved in on this. And green roofs simply are not an accepted stormwater control measure anywhere in North Carolina. They're not an accepted measure at the state level or at the city level because they cannot provide reliable detention or treatment. If you have a rainstorm today and you saturate that green roof and you get another rainstorm tomorrow, you don't get any additional detention. It's already saturated, so you don't get any benefit. Whereas a detention system, if you get a rainstorm today, you get that slower release And then when you get a rainstorm tomorrow, it's able to fill back up because it's now emptied over the required period of time in accordance with the UDO. As far as water quality treatment, it can have some benefits, but studies have shown that it's iffy. In a lot of cases, green roofs end up having to be fertilized. And so you end up having phosphate and nitrate runoff from green roofs rather than water quality improvement. So they're not a panacea. I'm not suggesting that they're not a good idea. I think they are. I think they help with control of temperature around the building from heat island effect. They potentially reduce the utility requirements of the building by casting a shadow on top of the building. But they're not a panacea. I think a great idea for green roofs would be to use them as an offset, an incentive for tree canopy preservation. But that's not codified in the UDO right now. I think it would be a great alternative to that. But they're not a stormwater measure per se. So that's
not the material that we've been given by other engineers and by city officials. But we note your concerns. Please continue.
I can only tell you what is allowed under the UDO and by the Stormwater Department. And green roofs are not an accepted stormwater detention and treatment device. And they're not an accepted stormwater and treatment device on the North Carolina DMP.
We've noted it.
Okay.
We've heard different from other professionals, including professionals within the city. Please continue.
So in summary, we've added street trees on both Carter Street and Ann Street. We've added trees around the perimeter of the site, and we've reduced the impervious area of the site in addressing the comments that were raised at the previous meeting.
And Matt Gower with ODA Architecture. In speaking to this site plan as well, I mean, the intent was that though it is an amenity area to the pool, the lawns would be live planted, and then we have increased in this area just off the vehicular drop-off was originally just planters, and it would be as it's over the parking roof, it would be a green roof in an effort to address that common and concern. But after some further evaluation, the larger span of the structure over the meeting area, which was proposed by this committee as a potential for a green roof, seemed less cost effective just because of the structural system rather than on top of the parking garage. So we've tried to maximize areas where we can on top of the parking garage to support that green roof particularly in that planting area, but also in the amenity lawn spaces. And then I think the elevation concerns that were discussed have already been addressed, but certainly happy to respond to any questions on that.
Sure. Maybe let's open up for comment regarding the site, and then we can move to the building.
Public comment, you mean, or
Committee comments,
Okay.
yeah.
First thing I want to mention is that, and Tony knows all of us, but you're not from Asheville, but all of us that sit up here do exactly what you guys do. We had to present in front of boards and commissions. I've had two over the last week, but I've just gotten raked over the coals. And so it's never fun being in this position on a project that's as important, especially as this one. So I'm not going to address the green roof issue for a couple of reasons. It's something that's been very important to me over the last 2 years when I was on the pre-design review committee. As the other members know, before Kate came on board, I was very pro-green roof for obvious reasons. And Tony, as Brian stated, I just can't agree with your statements about the engineering on the water quality. Yes, I know city stormwater engineers that are having a problem catching up with understanding the data. Kate could talk for an hour to explain this, and I hope she will. But my biggest concern is that I don't think you're going to have lawn at your pool area. That's probably going to need to be synthetic turf. Fescue turf by pool and lounge chairs is not going to work. But I just think that the other planting areas that are shown, any benefit they offer, I think it's gonna offer to the guest experience, but it's not gonna benefit downtown as a whole. We have not addressed the heat island effect that we spent so much time on last time. There's been no addressing on that. I had a hard time going through the documents because it looks like the landscape plan hasn't been updated, but the architectural site plan has, but the architectural site plan doesn't have any of the plants labeled on it. So that was a little confusing. But the other thing is we just don't have anything in concrete in front of us what's happening to stormwater. We know it sounds like you're using storm tech, and but I personally just, you know, the downtown design guidelines are different from the UDO. And you're in front of the design review committee, which is a brand new committee. And if we can't approve, if we don't feel good about this, and we're all locals and we know where you guys are, this is tough. But if we can't approve it, it can go to downtown, to the city council, excuse me. But I just feel like that there's a misunderstanding about green roofs. We're not seeing any kind of multifunctional stormwater system. This is throw it in the ground and be gone, done. We're not talking about all the other benefits for green roof systems. I think the added street trees are doing nothing. I really don't. It's just, it's a big blob on a plan, and on this plan, I can't even tell what kind of tree it is. So those are my comments.
So I can speak to the stormwater. We've worked on projects throughout the state where the green roof was used to meet stormwater requirements. It's a secondary stormwater control measure, so it often has to be used in addition with something else, which can be minor. And so there's that, stormwater quality and stormwater quantity, because it manages the first inch of rainfall, if it's designed correctly. You mentioned a panacea. Often we think of green roofs as a panacea. We think of one thing, we think of a shallow tray system. There's a lot of different ways to design a green roof based on the project goals, the project budget. What are you trying to accomplish with the green roof? And so I would just say that I hear you've explored it from a structural perspective, from a stormwater perspective. I think that there needs to be a little bit more education and an understanding about them. Second is that this is the perfect example for where it would be appropriate. We have a downtown project with no pervious surface. We're maximizing the building footprint, which we should in downtowns. And I totally agree that you can legally manage the stormwater below grade and meet the requirements. That is a given. I think what we're looking for is something more than that, because we have a situation in our downtown with old, impaired stormwater infrastructure. So any new project that comes along, particularly a hotel project, we're asking for something to alleviate the burden on that system. And so if you can manage 80% of that stormwater, if 80% of the stormwater on a building that is covering the whole site isn't even hitting our stormwater system, that's something that taxpayers benefit from. That's something our river benefits from. Our river, the French Broad, 19 miles of it was just listed on the impaired waterways list from North Carolina DEQ. Meanwhile, it's an enormous recreation and economic engine for our region. So these things are important beyond your project, and so that's why we are interested in seeing these types of projects contribute to our city in environmental ways and also social ways. Stephen Lee talks a lot about urban heat island effect. So that's where it's coming from, not because we think that you should just use it to meet the stormwater requirement. We're looking for it for other reasons too, and there really isn't any other stormwater control measure that can accomplish as many co-benefits that green stormwater infrastructure provides. And in this case, because we don't have a lot of space at grade, that's why we're leaning towards a green roof. If this was in a more suburban context, or we had a lot of space at grade to incorporate bioswales, rain gardens, things like that, I don't think we'd be talking about a green roof. But in this case, this is a really good, perfect example as to why we're asking for it. And from the structural, I'm sorry, I just don't agree that the additional load of a green roof is not cost effective, particularly for your client who's going to experience cost savings, significant cost savings over the life of their building. So that's what I have to say about the green roof. But I would go back to the street trees because I'm a landscape architect and I care more about more than just green roofs. And I do appreciate the additional street trees. Every street tree that we get in this town is a good thing. And so, well, maybe not everyone, but more street trees are important. They improve the quality of downtown. They help with urban heat island. So I do appreciate that addition and the sensitivity around the spacing and having that determine the number.
I have a question for you as well regarding, I'm seeing on the, both the site plans and the architectural, if you could zoom out on your image just a little bit, it looks like you're changing the material, or there's an indication of material change at the main entrance on the sidewalk, as well as up against the building on Ann Street and on the addition there. But I can't find out what that material is. Can you just tell me what that is?
That's correct. We've changed the material outside of the required 10-foot concrete sidewalk and at the pedestrian entrances to the building.
But what is the material change?
We haven't specified what it is at this point.
Okay.
We've talked about precast concrete pavers.
Okay. Okay, so some material change at the entrance and up against the on the Carter Street side, and then at the entrance for the Ann Street side, as well as up against the building where it exceeds the
That's
sidewalk.
correct.
Okay. Are you doing that consistently all the way down, or just up against the building, not against the parking deck?
Yeah, we didn't do it.
On the Ann Street side.
It's not against the parking deck. Simply
I don't
because-
disagree. I'm asking.
Yeah, simply because that's more service area for, when on trash day.
So
for-
it's to indicate this is for people.
That's right. It's just kind of to indicate that sort of public space
Okay.
and mark entry, important entry into the building.
Are there any other textual changes that are going on the streetscape itself? We'll get into architecture when we get there, but I'm making sure I understand the application.
No, they're not. The assumption here is that the standard running bond pattern will be what is required
Okay.
based on conversations that we've had with Will and others at this point.
Okay. Thank you. And one last one, on the north side of Carter Street, there's indication where there's a tree that's kind of like in the corner right there. Is that going to be mulch? Is that what's going to go on the ground cover around that tree? Where am I in plan? On this diagram.
The northeast
corner.
Northeast
Yes,
corner.
thank you. Mhm.
We haven't identified that ground treatment yet.
Okay.
It will be permeable, so it will not be concrete or pavers.
Sure.
Given the fact that we're showing a large tree, it would likely be mulch and plantings below it.
Okay.
So one of the comments that Brian brought up is something I wanted to mention, and that is the space along Ann Street that has the additional area beyond the required 10-foot sidewalk. And this area relates to one of the key downtown design guidelines under recommendation 6B, and it recommends to any developer to consider other landscape measures to soften the pedestrian experience by providing additional plantings other than just the minimum required, also using pervious materials, et cetera. So along Ann Street, where we have the different textured paving, that is the perfect area to try and utilize that recommendation in some way. It could be vertical landscaping, green screen that works with the architecture. It could be additional, ground covers and shrubs. Right now we have, what's not working, I feel like, and what's not meeting the spirit of what we're going after is we've got solid concrete to the base of the building, solid hard to the base of the building. And I will change my statement about the trees. I do appreciate the extra trees and the effort to bring those in. Thanks for bringing that up, Kate. But In terms of the site, and I'm just going to go ahead and mention this, I know that there's going to be architectural elements that we're about to discuss, but in terms of the site, this is a project that I cannot vote in favor of because we're just not there.
I agree, and I think that the comment that this has been a parking lot doesn't mean that, I mean, it's been a parking lot, it's been the minimal stormwater. I don't think that's a reason to not do more. I mean, this is gonna be a hotel in Asheville, which is almost guaranteed to be a profitable business, and it's gonna be here for a while, and it's on a tight street, and it needs to give back more than it's giving back to Asheville, I feel. And I think the concrete, yeah, I agree that that could be landscape. It needs to be something more for the pedestrian, for people who aren't staying in the hotel. There's lots of good, you know, experiences for those people, but what if you're walking by? I just think it could be more.
So the intent of my history on the site was not to suggest that we're doing this little bit to make a difference here. What I was saying is that the previous developer of the parking lot, the reconstruction of the parking lot, addressed some of the stormwater concerns. I believe that was voluntary. I don't think he had to do that. We will be addressing additional concerns that are associated with this development in order to bring this into compliance with UDO. I think everybody here is familiar with, I don't think the board members are here today from Homeward Bound, but I think everybody's familiar with our adjacency. And if you saw the article in the Citizen Times or WLOS this week, it was about this street. And a part of the goal in the development along the streetscape, particularly along Ann Street, is to address concerns about crime prevention through environmental design. And providing places for people to camp out and get behind vegetation and things like that is not something that we want to do. I think that providing opportunities for those businesses perhaps to put out planters or things like that makes sense in this environment. But I think dedicating streetscape to plants, plant material, and so forth is creating an opportunity for people to defecate and urinate along the street and camp out. As I mentioned last time, I was across this space, from this space for 6 years, and it's only gotten worse since then. So I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I think in terms of changes in texture along the street, that makes sense. Perhaps including some infiltration into that. It doesn't provide any detention. It provides permeability that gets directly piped into the stormwater system. So it's really not much different than if it were not permeable.
I don't necessarily agree with designing a project today for a problem that might not be here forever, though. Our homelessness problem has gotten better, and we hope that it keeps getting better. So designing this for a problem, I mean, this building will be here for a while, and if that's a concrete walkway all the way to the building, that's going to be here for a while. So I'm assuming there's going to be light on the exterior of the building, and that will discourage people. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Ms. Davis was at the meeting, the neighborhood meeting for this development, and I mentioned that I had worked across the street from this back when I did, from 2005 to 2012, and she said it's so much worse now.
Oh, for sure.
So it hasn't gotten better. And we had, our client had discussions with the owners of Homeward Bound in an attempt to acquire that property, and they were not interested in selling the property. So we don't foresee that use going away. And we're not suggesting that it necessarily should. And we do believe that eyes on the street and people on the street will help that situation. But we believe that it needs to be manageable from day one. And putting in opportunities for people, putting in spaces where they can get out of sight or where they can make use of it for camping or whatever other use they imagine is problematic from day one. So the idea of making that space adaptable to outdoor planters or seating or things like that is more flexible. And that's been our approach.
Could the outdoor planters, like, is there a way to incorporate that or to make sure that that is something that happens, whether the tenants on the lower level decide to do it or not? This is an important street for us, the pedestrian environment's important, and we want more than what we're seeing right now. You've offered some examples of ways that we could incorporate vegetation and make it more hospitable without contributing to a problem. I mean, is that something that we could explore more?
Possibly, but I'd just like to add, at the Downtown Commission meeting last week, we heard, as y'all probably know, there's a 60-day downtown safety push that's going on, and there's been huge positive benefits that have occurred with that. But the city manager said something that really struck with me in that meeting, and that was that Asheville's the city's responsibility is, yes, to try to develop ways to deal with the problems, but citizens and business owners also have to be involved. And I agree with Robin's statement. I mean, the property owner where this hotel is proposed also has to take some ownership in trying to help the situation. There are going to be permanent residents in this building. Hundreds of new hotel rooms are going up on this side of downtown. The streetscape, the pedestrian activity is going to completely change in a couple years there. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Look at all the hotel rooms that are going up there. So there's huge opportunity to do something along the street there. I think that, the homeless issue is just, if everybody thought that when a hotel came in front of here, we would be doomed downtown, literally. So I don't think it's a viable excuse.
I'm ready to talk about architecture. Are we ready to talk about architecture? Anybody else?
I
So-
do have one quick
Go ahead.
question. Can you, Stephen Lee or Kate may know the answer to this, but I believe the discussion at the last meeting with a couple of projects, we referenced the UDO and the downtown guidelines. Is there something in the guidelines that recommends innovative techniques for stormwater management? Can you point to that?
It's in other recommendations at the end of the downtown design review guidelines. It's
Okay.
recommendation B was the one that we were referencing. Rooftop terraces and green roofs are encouraged.
Okay.
And I think there's another one somewhere in there that we were looking at, but I can't remember that at the time.
Okay. I just wanted to.
So Chair, to your point, those innovative stormwater techniques have been utilized by multiple teams downtown to help satisfy part of that requirement
Thank you.
on non-hotel projects.
So architecturally, Will, thank you for kind of going through and showing us can you pull up one of the 3Ds if you don't mind? I just want to say I appreciate you listening to us. Thank you. That's always nice. I'm going to say that you have largely satisfied, Michael can jump in if he disagrees, but I think you've largely satisfied, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about, the two blank sides. I think that's much better and much more in keeping with the building. I'm very appreciative of that. I think the front, I think that solution at the top, I think that's it. I'd leave well enough alone, quit monkeying with it. Sorry if I made you monkey with it too much.
The process.
The back, it's much better than I saw it last time. Curious what the rest, everybody else thinks. Like I still think it's not, like it's different and it's reflective, but I think it just looks like a little brother tagging along right now. So I mean, honestly, architecturally, I could approve this pretty. I would vote to approve this. I'm just saying that rear part's not on N Street's not quite there yet. I'm curious what everybody else says. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I think it's a nice job so far.
I have a quick question. so I'm gonna go real fast while you. On the south elevation there, that retaining wall, what, it's shown now the same color as the building. That's not a retaining wall, that's a structural wall.
That's part of the
And
parking
so
garage.
it's just continue over across, how high is that?
I mean, it comes up, the parking level there, it's up, you know, it's just, yeah, 3 foot 6, 4 feet above just to screen the parking.
Okay, thanks.
And then that white strip beyond is the roof terrace beyond, for the pool amenity and
Got it, thanks.
public area. I can go to I included a series of kind of 3D massing to help hopefully better sort of describe that, so.
Yep.
And you said there's trash back there?
The trash is internal to the building. It would just be a holding area on trash days for the carts to be rolled out and
And it
stored
comes
until they're
out of
picked
that,
up.
opening
Yeah,
there in the corner? Is that-
there's a overhead door, that
Okay.
roll-up door here, and then a sort of sectioned off area where the bins would sit until the truck comes to pick them up, so.
I do see some like building lighting, especially on the Ann Street
Mhm.
view and on the South Carter Street view, you know, along your, the building pilasters, basically. You know, just for some, I guess, sidewalk level lighting. I just want to, again, encourage you, the Asheville Police Department is having, what do they call that? Robin, help me. The
Safety review?
safety review. Say it again. I'm not going to remember that. Anyway, they will review your your plans for like public safety kind of
Sure.
stuff, for that kind of thing. I would just encourage you, as it goes through this process, to do that so that anything they suggest can be incorporated.
Sure.
I'm going to echo Brian's comments and say that, you know, we do appreciate it, because I mean, it's clear that you heard us and you listened, and that's a big deal. On that back, I don't feel as strongly as Brian does about it. I think it's a lot better. I think just that lightening the color is going to, it helps it helps with that differentiation a little bit, and on the, you know, where the volume comes out and bridges across, you know, that's, you're seeing that, you're seeing that space better, you know, you can see that articulation better. I think you're gonna get better shadow lines on your brickwork. That is brick, right?
It is.
There's, you know, I think it's just, you're just gonna get better results there. Personally, I know Brian has he's got a problem on the backside, because it looks like a little portico, like attached portico, but I know that what you're doing is you're basically crashing two masses together, and one of them is a little bit, you know, one of them is really dark and solid, and the other one is, you know, it's the lighter, more articulated and open. So, you know, if I focus on this side, then this side, you know, it doesn't bother me as much. But I do think that, you know, when you look at, there's a view. It's the Ann Street view on A205. You know, you look at that, and I just, you know, personally, I think there's still too much black. It's too dark. You know, I look at the left side of that image, and I see more space and I see more depth, because I see the contrast between the light and dark. And when I look at the right side of the tower, it all just blends together. So, you know, that, to me, that's that's a missed opportunity. But
You're talking about the top left image?
at the top left, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's, you know, by making all of that black or dark,
You're talking about the main building, Ricardo?
Yes, the tower, yeah, the main tower. And, you know, in the same way.
And you're not talking about that big vertical element, but the bulk of that corner.
Exactly. And
That's the part I'm gonna see driving into town too.
And I think the ends look so much better. I think they would look even better if there was some contrast in the colors, but that's, overall, I don't, I think the building is beautiful and it is better, with the with the changes you made, I think they are an improvement.
Yeah, I think you could do something like on that piece, similar to what you did on some of the things on the left-hand piece. I'm looking at the Ann Street view, where you have a section that's delineated, and then you have a different color horizontal between the windows. If you change the horizontals on that, I guess that's the southwest facing side. Maybe just even in a couple of bays or something, just to break that up. Am I making any sense?
I'm not sure which image.
I'm on A210, and I'm looking at the South Ann Street view in 3D. If I understood it right, what Ricardo's talking about is that in that upper right-hand image, the right-hand side of the main block of the building, the hotel rooms, that big gray block is not as beautiful as the rest of the building, because it's all just a kind of undifferentiated, just glass and stuff. And you've done a lot of things where you've defined these wonderful vertical elements within the building, just in material changes. And without changing the material, but just changing the color, if you could do something similar on that one piece. Am I making sense? Do you know where I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah, I do.
Yeah, and it could be.
And it could just be like that one, maybe even just that one section where you've got the two balconies. Maybe you make those a little special. There's a couple things to do there. Or maybe there's just something going on that we don't see. I mean, when I zoom in on it, I can see some shadow lines. I see stuff going on. And maybe there's more there, but it's just not popping quite enough.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say on the elevation, it's the right side of this elevation there is articulated in the same way that it is on the left side of the Carter Street elevation. So that language, wraps around the building, and with its distance from the street, we were trying to give obviously prominence to the Ann Street on that side. And so I do think lightening up that building, the two-story building on Ann, certainly drew more attention to that. I mean, I do understand your comments about making the Ann Street side special. I think there's a difference in just design philosophy and for this project, and the owner.
Actually, the more I look at this,
tried to tie it together, but
you pulled it out, you differentiated it from the mass beyond and everything. Like I said, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I think you're there.
There's
some stuff on the streetscape that I think still needs to be addressed, but I think architecturally, you're pretty well there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a design philosophy, and I cannot remember where it came from, but I do remember it talks about the ideas of masses, and if you have a small mass in front of a large mass,
That's right.
and the smaller mass is a brighter color, or white, and the larger mass is black, then the larger mass tends to recede.
Correct.
And so that's kind of why I chose to make that piece on Ann after the discussion last time brighter, in hopes that that tower would kind of recede, and that Ann would that would become the focal point, and then the tower is sort of a background element.
I think if the Ann side is articulated like the Carter Street side, and it wraps, looks pretty good.
Yeah, I can, and it may be the lighting of the rendering. I can zoom in on this. We've done, there's some subtle material change on that band that does wrap. I just think it doesn't show up in the rendering. And then, at the top two floors, you know, we're kind of using the
If
balconies
it's doing
to-
that,
the
it's probably
projecting
just
balconies,
it's probably
so.
just an artifact of the rendering program and the way the
Yeah, I
sun
mean, I
angles are
think it's-
hitting. If it's doing what I see in the Carter Street side and it's wrapping that around, I think that's gonna do it.
Well, I'll add the same thing, that I think the north and the south ends where I had issues and they got way better. I think it's a better hotel.
Yeah, I mean, we even pulled part of the massing in to get an extra strip of windows. So we, you know, we certainly, and certainly it improves the guest experience as well.
I'd like to follow up on that discussion about the streetscape on Ann Street. Seems like the guidelines are pushing you towards storefronts and embracing the sidewalk, and then we're also saying we want you to cushion the building from the street with plantings. So I feel like you can only do one or the other, and I think the guidelines and your architectural response is to create storefront panels with glazing, which is the appropriate response, and putting shrubbery in front of it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think you've done what you can, and I think street trees are really the most we can ask for there. I think it would be weird to have shrubbery in front of storefronts.
I don't think the guidelines would push it to shrubbery. It says there's a variety of things you could do there. I just think it needs to be an engaging pedestrian experience, not something you walk beside, but something you walk through and into, is what I would respond to.
And I agree completely with what Brian just said. In these slivers in front of the building, putting in shrubs is the absolute opposite of what needs to be, what needs to happen. Integrated planters, vertical landscaping, green screen, it can all be integrated, but shrubs would never make it there. But like, think of the corner of College Street and Biltmore. The integrated plantings in the corner of that hotel, how that was worked in. Planters could be integrated into the architecture, and vertical landscape connected to the building could be very simple.
Do you have any more comments about the architecture?
We did receive public comment, correct?
Yes. There is some public comment online. I think mostly regarding the construction phase and how that will affect A-Hope and the other businesses, Salvation Army in that area. And I'd like to open it up for public comment if there is anyone in the room. All right, so is there a motion?
I'd like to ask a question of staff. I'm assuming at some point there's going to be a vote today on this. What are the opportunities for the developer in terms of if there's a yes vote or a no vote? Is there a period of time they would have to wait to come back, or could they come back with adjusted plans? I mean, it doesn't like put them on hold for a year like HRC would.
Right, yeah, since it's not like city council or HRC where a no vote would tie them up or make them withdraw their application. I think one way to go forward is you could always make a vote to approve, and then if that doesn't pass, we could ask the applicant wanted to be continued or how they wanted to go forward from there.
Well, so what conditions could be, let me be candid, architecturally, I'm there. And site design, I'm probably, and I apologize to you two, but I'm probably 90% of the way there. I think there's some things they could do for storm, there's some things they could do on the streetscape. But I'm almost there. So are there conditions under which they could receive a positive vote? If I could ask that, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
I feel good about what I expressed, and I think that we all, I just think site work and landscape architectural work and downtown just needs to be like a lot better. And I don't want to make an example out of like, one project, but I think I stand behind what I said. I agree with Stephen Lee. I'm not prepared to say which way I'm going to vote right now. I'm still working it out in my head, trying to balance all the challenges of the project. I understand what that's like. I'm trying to balance what our role is here. And I also appreciate the work on the architectural side. I'm not just sitting here only focused on the site design, so.
Well, I would just like to state that, yes, the project appears to be meeting technical review standards. That is technical review. That is city staff reviewing minimum requirements for public safety and the use of utilities and vehicular safety. 10-foot sidewalks, minimum required street trees, hooking into public utilities. It is minimum requirements. TRC does not discuss design. I don't see anywhere in this project where there's been any attempt beyond a normal building, an apartment building, an office building. I don't see any attempt to consider landscaping measures that go beyond what is minimum required. Yes, there are a few more trees, but folks, I just feel firmly that hotels need to play an active role in making a difference with our urban heat island effect. Look at what we have in the queue coming before us. What's in these engineering plans right now does nothing to improve our heat island effect. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in addition to the it's an existing impervious surface, but in addition to that, there are all the other systems in this building that make it work that contribute to an increased heat island effect. The mechanical systems, so it's, it's architecture and it's site. And that's just why I just can't vote in a positive way for site. It meets TRC, so what? If we do that, then this should just be an architectural review, and that's it.
Do you have any conditions that we could move forward with? Is there an opportunity to, if we don't take a vote today, what is the?
We have to vote.
Okay.
Unless the applicant requests a continuance, I think we're required to vote.
Yeah, that is correct. So, a motion can be made to approve, and then even if it's not necessarily by a person who's going to vote for that motion, so motions can be made and seconded, and then a vote can be taken, and then we can kind of go from there as well.
Let's just do this thing.
Okay. Is
I have a
there?
question.
Yeah.
I understand the request for the green roof, and I'm not here to talk about that. Architecture is out of my area of expertise. But we're basically showing street trees right now that are going to create a shade condition along those sidewalks from the south of the site and the north of the site on both sides. So I would ask, from a site level, what else do you need to see that's going to make an effect on heat island effect? What are some specific examples of things that you want to see that are going to make a difference, a real difference in heat island effect?
It's addressing the roof. That's the only other recourse if you're building downtown. And downtown is where we have the urban heat island effect.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's that simple.
So, and I understand your comment about minimum compliance. It's really not minimum compliance, and I think you realize that. I think you're being I'm a little bit excessive about that comment.
Help me understand that, Tony. What is going beyond minimum requirements?
We're
Other than
providing
additional trees.
Well, that's it. We're providing additional trees that aren't required for minimum compliance. So that's one thing. We've proposed to provide additional trees around the site, not just along the street, but around the site in order to comply with the tree canopy preservation requirements. And granted, some of that's in our own benefit because we have a reduction in the fee in lieu that we would otherwise have to pay. But nevertheless, it reduces that stormwater runoff and it reduces that heat island effect, which seems to be a major point of concern for you. We have made a change in the materials at the street level. Those have no effect on the heat island effect, really. But like I said, the trees will, you know, as they mature, they'll completely shade those sidewalks, and so they'll eliminate that aspect of it. So I would, you know, contradict that it's simply minimum compliance. And I would be really open to hearing if there's anything at the street level that's going to contribute to that.
Well, maybe not heat island, but Stephen Lee, what about integrated planters? I know that's architectural, but,
It's both.
I mean,
Yeah, I think it's-
there's just nothing there. And again, 3 or 4 additional trees takes one tiny baby step going beyond minimum requirements. And Tony, it's roof. I mean, your site's not gonna be able to handle that requirement. It's roof. But it's, you know, maybe it's 4 trees, but in the scheme of things, these are 2-inch trees going in. Yes, they'll get big. Yes, they'll shade the sidewalks, but it's a minimum TRC, and I want to see these recommendations in the downtown design guidelines at least explored and indicated in some way, where we're going beyond just the minimum required. It's a hotel, and again, there's a reason this committee was put into place, and none of us like trying to deal with some of the challenging aspects of this. There was a reason this committee was put in place, and our council representative on Downtown Commission makes this very, very clear. And it was in an effort to, work with designers to try and collaborate to get the best project for the developer and for the citizens of Asheville, and that has happened on this project. So, with that, I'd like to make a motion, and unless, Tony, you have something else you'd like to say?
No.
Okay.
I'm good, thanks.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that the Design Review Committee acknowledges and appreciates the adjustments and improvements and taking recommendations on the architectural design. However, the concern still remains that the landscaping and stormwater control measures are not at a level that provides for a reasonable and appropriate hotel project. Additional measures need to be taken that follow the downtown design guidelines, recommendation 6B, that show that plantings, impervious materials, et cetera, go beyond minimum requirements, and the street level is activated in ways that both work for the developer and for the citizens of Asheville.
So is it a motion to recommend denial?
That is correct.
And if I may, I'm Chair John Noor. I'm with Robertson Stevens. I represent the developer at this time. We'd like to ask that this be continued so that we can try and take one more pass at this before the motion would be acted on. That would be our request at
I would
this
like to
time.
make a friendly amendment to Stephen Lee's motion that we accept the motion for continuance based on the following.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Great.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Yeah, to a date certain of.
We didn't make a motion to continue. Would the design team please let us know whether they want to do the June 15th or the July?
Sure.
Yes, please do. Thank you. I was supposed to do that in my motion, my fault. What are you doing? I thought you were pretending to be public. I was like, dude, you don't have to do that.
I thought he was going to present a project.
Those two, forgive me, I missed the two.
June 15th and July 20th are the two dates. And we'll obviously, can they, if we do the June 15th and they can't make it, they can ask to continue to the June. You can, we'll just set it to the June 15th. If you can't make it, we'll set it, it'll be continued by staff. All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Sounds like we're in a little short recess.
Yes.
Clearly.
Take a break before meeting. Just stumbling through. Yeah, thank you.
It's like stress, right? You're trying to be fair to like the community and our this and them and.
Is it hot in
It's just.
Look, there's a thermostat. Will, come on.
We still have 3 more projects.
It's not. I get cranky, Will, I get cranky. No, that stuff makes me feel bad. I'll drink some water.
It's
I had lunch
hot.
before I came.
Well, he's a piece.
No, that's.
What Tony said. You're,
Hey,
we
Will,
just don't.
Yeah.
The structural piece.
well, he was like, it's not feasible. Is there an easier way to solve this?
The best way is to have a preview road like this.
Or if he did, he asked it, if he did, he asked it in this way. He said, Nancy, you don't want to do a green roof, correct? She said, that's correct.
Exactly. And you know what? I can continue to not approve it, and it can go to city council. And then that will change.
I figured it out once and I forgot. I was like, shoot, I know I had it. Okay, thank you.
This is a great project.
Yeah. Have you seen what a difference it will make if that hall room has, I mean, it's the views from the roof, looking down on that plant. You may need to do that. Well, what we need to do is sit down and talk.
It's so frustrating. It's just so frustrating.
Well,
And then,
There was something also in the UDO about innovative smart.
there is.
There
Yeah.
is, where is that?
It's one of the recommendations. It's not in the UDO, it's in the design guidelines.
I know there's, oh, okay, where is
And the
that?
only reason I know it is because Shannon Tucker had mentioned it several times in our meetings.
And it's not this one,
It's
there's
not in
another
the
one.
landscaping.
Where is that?
It
Somewhere.
must be in storm. Or other recommendations, but I remember she used to reference it all the time. Yeah.
Was that, restoration?
I took that off my plate.
What's the one? Yeah. Was that house project?
there you go. You just say, no, I'm just kidding. No, you're right. We have a.
I understand. I'm just wondering.
We have a, but we're trying to balance. Well, it's not that. That's much better.
So the next one is, the dude, which is mine.
Nobody was asking.
Can I close this, Will?
Close.
Can I close this?
Yeah, close this one. I think I have them all in order, so once I close that one, I close that one. There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
The guidelines keep changing. It's going to be getting easier. You made a-
Yes.
I wanted wood clad windows, and then of course when you do wood, now I have wood clad. That's not fair.
No, it's not.
Well, and that's why we're here. I don't want the major discussion.
We got more than before the screen roofs.
But Peter, outreach loves things, so I wouldn't be surprised if you put one on there anyway, but I haven't been through that project since it's been done.
When did they switch from,
Oh, we quit in schematic design, so. Long.
you fired out?
Bill, you know what a 2-inch looks like green, and if they don't put braces, if they don't put like a metal collar around it, it's, but what happens is they put in these whips, and the second the project was taken over, the cities are there's more immediate impact. That's exactly what the definition is. Right, 2 inches too small. It's too small. One kid goes in and does this.
All right.
We've got so
So
many.
3 more projects.
I know.
Level 2 downtown, it's only a voluntary compliance though, so you don't have to rack your brains around it too hard, I don't think. You vote on it, but it's, you don't, they don't really care if you approve it or not, honestly. It's not going to city council. But it regulates.
It's in the main.
Even projects aren't going to city council and don't.
We all know that.
They're still gonna
We-
approve.
I said,
Need a formal review.
we hear you. That's false. You just made a false statement. But you're not under oath, so, you know, that's between you and the DE board.
So, very simple. I think I've seen a lot of projects get better through the review process, whether it was required or not. I think there's a lot of changes that are causing control.
Yeah, is everyone ready? We have.
Atta girl.
And just a reminder, if folks can speak into the microphone. I think we got these guys plugged in, but they don't really register unless you're really close to them. So do your best, I don't know, rock singer impression.
Telephone voice.
Yeah, there you go. Helps folks streaming at home. So just a reminder for that.
All right, we have 3 more projects to review. Everybody, buckle up.
If you want to announce the next one. On
So
the
this
agenda.
is the 226 Hilliard Avenue, the Duke, and it's a level 2 review, formal review.
Chair, Commissioner, my name is Clay Mitchell. I'm in the current planning department with Will. I will be using a presentation as a crutch again until I become so familiar with everything that I don't need to do this, but I think it helps. You've seen this application informally before, but I'm just going to go through it again because this is the formal review for you as well as for the public who is in attendance and the numerous people that are no doubt watching the meeting. In the left is the overhead of the site, pretty much as it is today. You can see the outline of the existing building with the, looks like some kind of rubberized roof. And then there's an additional meta building that's been added to the right over the history. I don't know what time frame that was added or not. And then on the right, on the screen, it's context within kind of the south area of our downtown, technically in the beginning of the South Slope planning area. This is a view directly onto the site from the middle of the intersection. You can see on the left side of the buildings the addition, and then the white part of the building is the original building that, as you know, in the application is preserved and rehabilitated. There are some trees on the site. It's difficult to envision those being preserved given our setback requirements The buildings are pushed up to the edge of the property, but I'll go over the landscaping at a later time. That was a comment from the public, and I just wanted to highlight that challenge. So this is looking in the opposite direction, just to give you some context. A lot of the buildings in the immediate area are 1 story, and on the right, that one sinks down. You could argue it's even less than a story. Lots of overhead utilities in the location, and a pretty busy intersection if you happen to go through that during peak hours. This looks directly across the street at the hotspot, which is now closed. There's an approval, and I'll show you that approval later, to the left of the hotspot. We currently have no plans or no indication of anything going on that site, but is obviously for sale and prime for redevelopment. This is the building next to the hotspot that's been approved. It's still currently in that status. I don't have any updates, unfortunately, on what the status of this application or this site is. This is the current state of the existing building on the site. Google Street View goes back to about 2008. It generally looks the same if you go back in time. And again, you can see the incredible amount of overhead utilities in this area. Here's the, I found people have been talking about this site, so I looked it up. It turns out, I think this may actually be the location where Hazen Lunsford was founded, and they are still in existence in a pretty serious undertaking. I think their offices are in Raleigh, so Raleigh, getting used to North Carolina. Their 100-year anniversary is coming up, so hopefully the developer will have this built and they'll have a big celebration in 2026. But this is just a little history about the site. And I think it's telling because the applicant pointed this out in their materials, they're kind of bringing back that actual historic storefront, and that's just a nice element that is worth pointing out. The basics, this has all been reviewed by the Technical Review Committee. It got approved with conditions earlier this week. They had an informal visit with the Downtown Commission last week. Pending after this process, the next step will be planning and zoning, which we currently have scheduled for June 7th. It is in the downtown area of the future land use in the comprehensive plan. It's in the central business district, so technically parking is not required, but because it's a residential use and the applicant is showing parking, there will be parking provided. And from a regulatory standpoint, as well as kind of a use standpoint, both Hilliard and Ashland are considered key pedestrian streets. This is the site plan that you're familiar with. The pink area the pink lines are retaining walls. You can see on the left is kind of the ground level parking area, which is going to be beneath the existing building, and the proposed building will be on a podium. The podium actually is at street level on Hilliard, and then, as you know, the topography changes pretty dramatically as you go down Ashland. It starts almost at street level, and then we'll talk about it. That was one of your primary points when we discussed this application informally, how that gap appears in the building on the podium on the southern portion of the site. I'll also point out this area on the south shows a pedestrian connection from Grove Street, South Grove Street here. We talked with the applicant about carrying this north, but that's a very difficult challenge to get that sidewalk up that road or along the side of the road. Is very steep. So getting into the site, you can go through the courtyards and get up to Hilliard, but the prime connection is due east along the southern portion of the site, to Ashland. And so this sidewalk continues all the way over here. And we've talked with the applicant about these SEPTED design principles, how low level, kind of constant lighting, not creating areas that are able to be hidden in to make sure that particular sidewalk remains safe for all users. And then you start to see the addition of landscaping. You see the street trees. Remember from the street view, significant amount of overhead utilities on Hilliard Ave, so those are the smaller trees. On Ashland, the applicant has pulled the street trees out of the sidewalk, so we have the full 10-foot width sidewalk unobstructed, and the street trees are planted in a grass strip, which will be great for the trees and also provides opportunity for additional landscaping along that edge of the building while maintaining our minimum sidewalk widths. These are details of that area. Those street trees are off a little bit to preserve that site triangle, which is going to be important for people coming in and out of the site, particularly leaving the site. So being able to see through those site triangles and get those trees out of there is something that is supported by city staff and the transportation department. There's some discussion about vertical site, which the applicant and transportation is working on the last tree close to the intersection to make sure that cars that approach the intersection are able to see the lights that are at the intersection controlling it. It's this tree here that the applicant and transportation department is worried about or talking about. So that there may be some movement on that tree to preserve kind of that view shed for drivers. And then this on the right is further detail of the landscaping as the building progresses towards the south. One of the requirements asked about is the programming inside the building. These are the floor plans of the new residential building. This is the floor plan kind of laid over the site plan so you can see how the main hallway connects to the stairs and the elevator facility on the southern portion of the L. And then there's a connection out onto Hilliard through a hallway and a connection into the courtyard at the end of that hallway in that location. Here is a cross-section of the building showing you the use of the floors, all residential, a single commercial space in the existing building, and some elevator access to the roof, which is activated for that commercial site. These are the renderings that are responsive to the comments that you made in the informal review, changes that I will let all of you discuss. That is your forte. You can see a little bit better how the stairwell interacts, that central stairwell. One branch goes up to the roof, the other goes down to the surface lot, and then you can see in the lower left-hand corner, as you're looking at the slide, the stairwell from the courtyard outside the commercial use that goes up to the rooftop as well. We have new renderings that kind of integrate the landscaping with the building design so you can see how all of that interfaces together. This shows the commercial activity in the street trees. So this is it without the landscaping. This is it with the landscaping. So you can see along Ashland the additional landscaping that was added to kind of soften that in that grassed area. It sits in front of the screening and the podiums that support the building. But this is, you had a nice discussion with the applicant about this kind of an activation and connection at the last meeting.
Are these in the?
No.
We got them just before the meeting.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. This is that vertical look down on the site with.
Yeah, we're way more interested in the new renderings.
This one?
Yeah.
So this is looking head on, obviously, off Hilliard. And then this is Ashland. And you can see the treatment behind the landscaping and the rendering with the landscaping implemented. And I believe a couple more renderings. There were some questions about what the relationship on the internal side of the building with the courtyard or the internal area. You can see balconies that are now shown on the design, a close-up of the stairwells that provide those connections, and then a top-down approach, which I believe is my last slide. It gives a nice kind of context for the programming on the site and what's going to be happening in those courtyards and on the rooftop. And with that, that's the complete application. The applicant sure is also, sorry that we got those renderings in kind of late, but I wanted to get them into my presentation so you could at least see them and discuss them.
Yes, thanks.
That's it.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have the applicant? Thank you.
Hello, Chris Day with Civil Design Concepts. Thank you very much. Thank you, Clay. You're pretty much about to get me out of a job up here because you do such a, like that. I sit here, I'm like, well, he already talked about that. He already talked about that. You did a great job. I appreciate it. And I do apologize for the delay in the renderings that they weren't in the original package. And I'll also just put a small caveat that I think the renderings do a great job. In some aspects, they're not dead on perfect. This is a great example
Yeah,
of
there's no
like
trash.
right, the trash isn't shown there, the sidewalk along the bottom, and then also our street trees aren't totally lined up, you know. As Clay pointed out, along Hilliard, we have overhead power lines, so we actually have twice the street trees that are shown right there. They're just smaller street trees. What the renderings do help out here, and I'll let our architect, Brian Slevar, I'll let him speak a little bit more to some of the, you guys had asked, let me slow down a little bit. I got distracted by the rabbit up on the screen, or the squirrel. So the big things, and I saw it in Clay's presentation, but most of you guys were here last week, or last month. A couple weren't. This is the third rendition of this project. The very first one was almost a Texas donut. It was a parking deck surrounded on three sides by a building. It was a huge a large massing. And this latest version of this project, we're really excited about with the historic restoration of the old Hayes and Lunsford building, as Clay did a great job pointing out. One of the things that also came up at the last month was understanding a little bit more about what our thoughts were on the roof and the patio courtyard area. So you see there on the far west side of the site with like the blue umbrellas, that's the courtyard that comes straight off of the commercial space of the Hayes and Lunsford building. It's actually kind of tucked away behind the street there, as there's a building addition that helps us get our 80% frontage. It also provides architectural code, yada, yada stuff to get to the roof that Brian can speak to, and you guys are all experts on. It also gives a little more information, or at least some ideas on how that central gate, our main entryway into the site, that central gate and kind of courtyard space provides access to both the commercial space as well as kind of like where that yellow box is into the to the residential units.
Speaking to that, Chris, is there any texture change, material change in the sidewalk itself as you come to that main entrance from Hilliard?
I would imagine so. The sidewalk is going to have to be running bond pattern because we're in the public works, public right-of-way. So we're proposing that would be the running bond. As we come in, I'll let Brian speak to any material changes, but
Because
it
the
makes
gate's set
it makes
back,
sense.
so you could technically, I think the running bond is just in the 10-foot, is that right? And then past the 10-foot, you can start to make the change to signify that you're kind of entering the property.
We could make the change. The other thing that we were considering, Ashland we're showing, as Clay mentioned, a 10-foot sidewalk, free and clear with landscape area behind it that we use to help screen the parking under the podium. Along Hilliard, the vast majority of that sidewalk is in excess of 10 feet. And so we've talked about up against the building, kind of as you get past that 10-foot section where there could be a material change. We could also, along the building frontage, open up spaces for more green, pervious space, whether that be some shrubbery or landscaping or things like that. So as we're also providing over along Ashland, we see a great opportunity for creating some of that.
Then we're not doing talkitecture. Which one is it going to be? Is it going to be concrete or is it going to be pervious as you get past the 10 feet? What's the actual proposal? Right.
So right now, the plans actually show that as impervious.
Okay.
All the way up on here we go, along Hilliard.
Yeah, but there's that pink line, and I was
The
getting confused.
pink line, and I'll let Brian speak to that. That's a little bit of an architectural element there that creates, hey, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian Slevar, Carmina Wood Design. Yeah, right now, there's the 10-foot gap that we have for the sidewalk, and then where we have our entrance feature poking out, we're right on the property line right there, with all of our balconies that overhang above are also on our property, so they're not over the right of way. So there ends up being this I don't know, 5-foot strip basically around the building that, and if you go look at one of the renderings, so you can kind of see that it comes around the corner.
Right.
And right now, we stopped it where grade sort of hits the podium, but I think to Chris's point before, that could continue down all the way back to, you know, where the courtyard opens up and.
Right.
So is
And
it
I'll
your?
propose that we do actually, as you see that those, what I would call like the nook and cranny up against the building,
Yes, sir.
outside of that 10-foot area, that we will not keep that concrete all the way up and create a pervious space there for some landscaping, green.
Well, L101 shows a bunch of plants there.
Yeah, I feel like that's a plan.
Right there even, it was on that detail.
This
right there.
is,
Some-
no, this is.
I'm trying to
along
see if I'm
oh,
doing
yeah.
this as a
Oh, you're talking
condition
about in the
or if
pink
it's already in
area.
the drawings.
Right.
And what I'm saying is on the other side
Oh,
of that
okay.
stairwell entrance, where we actually have more area to continue that same idea.
Gotcha.
Yeah, right now, we stop where we kind of intersect at grade level.
Yeah, so I guess my question is that if we have this discussion and you agree to it as a condition, is that a condition or it's not in the drawings? But from what I'm hearing, that could be a condition that outside of the 10-foot, that there is a pervious or other landscape design element between the 10-foot sidewalk and the
In
building.
the building face, yes.
Is that?
That is acceptable.
Is that agreeable?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, keep going.
I think the only other thing that I wanted to mention is, I'm gonna go all the way to the rendering again, to the site one, is the fact that, as Clay pointed out, we are removing a portion of an existing building addition that came on after the original building. The rest of the site is, there are some trees up at the corner, but the rest of the site is a surface parking lot. Our intention would be to have a reduction in our impervious surfaces from what are out there today, and we've got some great opportunity to, we're exploring some pervious pavers down in this area, as well as this central courtyard being a rain garden stormwater control measure as we move forward to the next phase with detailed drawings with
So, Chris,
staff.
if you did that, you wouldn't necessarily need an underground?
No, we're not anticipating any underground system on this site.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to talk about the architecture?
I don't, but I'm.
Not you, but yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Don't be like that.
Oh, you want me? Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry, I
yes,
thought you were.
Please, go ahead. Oh,
So I think as you kind of saw before, we tried to de-dense this thing, get it more playful, get it more colorful. We went back and looked at some of the comments from the informal, and we kind of stuck a little bit to some of our guns because they are driven around a lot of the floor plan and the unit mixes that we have to hit. So a lot of these boxes are the same. All the boxes that are the same unit types have the same facade treatments, so that's where a little bit of that, we think it's fun and playful. I know the last time we talked about it being a little maybe too loose, but that's sort of, the window openings and everything are all driven around these very efficient units that we have. I think the idea that we tried to show here was that tapering of the building in between the existing and the new, and how we come around the corner. I think last time we didn't have a great shot showing that there are windows on those ends. You know, I think that we're trying to activate this courtyard as best we can. Here we're showing it kind of at a dusk point. You know, we're thinking like the string lights across the top to keep it active and busy at night. I think in the overhead shot, you can kind of see where we have some green areas that we want to use. Really keep it more pedestrian, less just benches and things like that, but a lot more active. We think the interaction between the residents coming out of the building at that at the end of the courtyard here, or the corridor, you know, and then their decisions to go down below to the parking, go out to Hilliard, or go up to the roof deck, you know, kind of gives a good mix between the pedestrians and the residents. The commercial use, again, we're still working through that. This rooftop idea, it's conceptual at this point. I mean, we want it to be active. We want it to be multi-purpose. We don't want it to just be a field of gravel and picnic tables. We really want to try to come up with a really good design for it. I think right now, conceptually, we're showing some hard surfaces, some soft surfaces. Again, we're still exploring what structurally this building can handle, but I think most of what we're showing is possible.
So that's going to be like a grocery store with food, right?
What's that?
I said that's going to be a grocery store that serves food, right? That's what the area needs. A grocery store.
And is that an elevator, the small square on the rooftop?
So right now, yeah, this is the old freight elevator that's not in the building anymore, but the tower is there. We were going to leave it because we think it's a pretty cool element for at the roof. There's actually a little tiny stair that goes up the back that we think, you know, we'll explore that. So we added a new elevator in this building over here, which is part of that, what we kind of refer to as the annex off the front, which gives us that, this piece over here.
Frames.
So that really is going to be internally accessed.
What?
That's your accessible entrance?
So our accessible entrances right now are all right here at grade.
Okay.
And then that would then tie into the patio too. So you'd be able to go through the building, go up. There really isn't a way with the way the grade works for that thing to be accessible from the street because again, the street's so steep. So right now, the idea is that that would be access from inside the commercial space, take you up and down, and then there's actually a split in I think there's probably 3 parts to this building originally, but there's about a 3.5-foot step that you can see right here. And what we're actually proposing is, you can kind of see, so the elevator comes here, you walk across the roof, and then we have a ramp down to the main roof. And then that kind of allows us to do all of our screening for the mechanical units for the commercial space up there. And then we got actually the stair also from the patio, so plenty of ways to get off the roof for life safety purposes. So the only other thing, I think the residential style windows is really what we like. We think it's appropriate for a residential building. I know the urban context, maybe it was up for question last time, but we think we really see ourselves as this transition from the single-family neighborhood to the actual core of downtown. So we tried to be.
Are the buttons still only on the top portion of the window? I think last time you said.
Yeah,
they were
we
on
looked
both.
at it both ways, and we felt that it just got too busy. You know, I think right now we're with those buttons in there on the upper lights. We like the look of it. We didn't like losing them, and we did not like putting them in both sashes up and down.
Okay, I still don't like the windows. I think part of what I'm reacting to is that there's not, so I appreciate the revisions, the refinements that you've made. I would say, I would push you a little bit further and say that just like you have kind of so on these kinds of plans, we have these kinds of exterior materials, I would say then maybe you have a slightly different window shape pattern for those pieces. Because it's all the same window size and shape. You've got a few pairs here and there,
yeah.
But for the most part, it's the exact same window, and it doesn't differentiate in proportion or size. And so I would push you to take that a step further and refine your window sizes. I know you don't want a ton of window sizes, but you have a few different types, and it would differentiate the types, the building types as well. Kind of not the building types, but the logic of your language. It's a little muddy to me because the windows are so consistent throughout the different notes that you're striking there. So I'd say that first. I have 2 kind of main things that I'm still struggling with a little bit. My main one is the view of the building coming up Ashland. I realize you're planning things and I realize you're doing things on that corner, but that corner is going to be very prominent. People coming from the south of town driving up Ashland, and they're looking at that. And
I mean, we tried to activate it by turning our units to give us some activity in that facade.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we do. We have a flat plate podium. We've got, the topo is what it is. We've left the open end of the building open instead of solid to try to keep it a little bit light and airy on that side and not have a solid wall for security purposes. But I mean,
I get that.
I think once the landscaping is in there versus this bare rendering, I think that gives it its appeal.
It still looks like it's floating. And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead, have at
But,
it, for someone else.
Yeah, the Ashland part, I can't get over. I love the little yellow highlights. I think they're awesome. You even have one on the existing building, and I hope you keep all that. But the Ashland part, I wish some of the walls could come all the way down or something to help ground it. It just, by the time it gets down there, I know there's gonna be plantings and things, but I still think that when you're walking by it, you're gonna see in
So-
there and it looks like it's floating.
You went just where I was going. So the fun part about the little yellow part is that it's a little playful thing, and you've got the one part where it's actually grounded, and that's on that one corner, and then you've got the main corner. And I would say this corner, you could use the little yellow playful part to create some way to ground that corner of the building.
On the Ashland.
On the Ashland
Okay.
end, that would incorporate, it would take that corner, and so similar to the way that you've used the little yellow part to kind of land on the building at certain places, so it's, the little yellow part is like, you know, come in here, look at me here, and then on that corner, maybe there's something that you can do there as well.
Okay.
And I just, again, that end of the building is not currently, and we can set that as a condition, you know, that the applicant will, you know, incorporate a consistent design element on the end of the Ashland end of the building. I hear what you're saying about landscaping, but just putting plants in front of it is not the kind of landscaping solution I'd want to see you do. I'd want to see some kind of landscaped element, a designed element, not just a couple of bushes that are hiding it, but it's actually integrated. Forgive me if
yeah, I mean, that thing's 14 feet in the air. It's gonna be a little bit more than some plantings. The idea that we have too with the screening for the security screening of the thing is, you know, vines growing up and integrating it into the building. I mean, I don't think we expect it just to be low level. And in fact, you know, like in the rendering, you can see, I mean, this thing is just growing as it goes down the hill, again, to try to take away from that point of it floating. But I don't disagree with your comment about trying to ground that corner.
So I want to say that about that piece. And my last thing, and I really just noticed it now, on the Hazen Lunsford building, you have this neat little annex, and it goes up, and then the screen wall goes across, but I kind of catch a hint of it. And like, to my eye, as I look at that top elevation and even the rendering, I want that piece the same height all the way across, so that like I really get this, like this that is cutting the thing, you know, that's engaged in it. Or I want that screen wall to just be a screen wall and not look like the element.
Yeah, we could probably do that. I think.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It looks like it's part of that element, but it's like subsidiary.
It should be
to
one
it
or the
in a
other.
weird way.
Yeah.
And so I either want it to be different, or I want that element to be.
I think
all the
we
way
could
across.
probably do the same kind of similar screening that we have for the below the podium. And then, because I mean, the height of that annex part is driven by the override of the elevator. So, yeah, maybe, I agree. Yeah, we could.
Do you see what I'm?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Can you switch to the Ashland view? Sorry, no, the.
Oh, the corner?
Yeah, the corner. So, I'll ask a dumb question. Are these plantings evergreens? Because they don't look like evergreens. So what happens in the winter?
This is December.
Yeah, that's a landscaping question.
They're not all
The street trees aren't evergreens, so, but I know that we don't have them specified out now, but we're happy to make a condition on the additional above and beyond landscaping that we're doing outside of the street trees being evergreen, or a portion of those being
So it won't
evergreen.
look this good. Because this looked like my mother's garden, and she lives in the tropics. So I I'm sensing some resistance to anchoring the building down and losing this floating sense. I'm not sure why. Is it because you need a certain amount of ventilation for the garage?
I think that's part of it. I think what we continue to run into, and I think it was evident in the previous schemes, is you don't realize how tall this really is. And it is a big blank wall, and opposed to just putting in either fake windows or, you know, bringing that screening in and through, it really just ends up getting very, very heavy at the bottom.
I
So,
don't think you'd have to pull down the whole wall, though. I think you could pull down, like, I'm looking at the Ashland Avenue elevation on A502, and you have that brown piece that's
This
vertical. Yeah, I mean, what if that came all the way down, you
I would
know?
land
And then
all
you
the
had
way
some kind of grates there?
Yeah.
I mean,
if it's limited, I think that could.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
all. It just needs a little bit to come
Okay.
down.
Yeah.
Well, maybe with how we look at that corner, that'll,
Yeah.
I think the brown elements are kind of like I mean, they're the ones that go up farther, so I would bring them down farther. If you landed all of those brown elements, I think that would ground the building and address the bulk.
And the corner, I would do the
Yeah,
corner
the-
as well,
yeah.
But, so, and you mentioned like ivy growing on there, so that's why I asked about the ventilation factor. Because if you've got a bunch of ivy growing on your screens, then you're blocking
yeah,
ventilation.
it's not, we could, if that was solid, it still meets the open requirements, so, yeah. Yeah, we can look at bringing that down when we look at that corner, yeah.
Can I ask a procedural question? I mean, these drawings don't look done. Are we giving final review? There's no railing details. There was mention of screening for the rooftop mechanicals, but it doesn't appear that there really is. There's just not enough detail. The floor plan are basically just schematic diagrams of unit types.
We don't review the floor plans.
No, I mean, it looks like it's really early in on the process where balcony depths haven't been articulated, railings haven't been articulated.
We showed the balcony depths on the sections. We have that.
And just to clarify, this is a mandatory review, voluntary compliance, since it's a level 2. A lot of those details will be reviewed at final technical review committee as well for technical compliance with building code and the zoning.
So we review this, so it's a little different, Michael, than what you're.
I know, but we're talking about window muntin patterns, but we're not gonna talk about railings?
No, we can, this is all fair game. I'm making, so when we used to do it, it was all voluntary compliance. Now, the hotel stuff, if they're
I understand.
bypassing, okay, making sure.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like the drawings were done. Personally, I think it has a long way to go. I don't understand the podium thing at all. I haven't heard any reason. I mean, I hear the commission saying bring some elements and let the building like land on the ground, and I'm hearing a few of the pieces. I don't know why you wouldn't bring most of the building down and touch the ground. That courtyard, that entrance from Hilliard comes into a platform that feeds the existing building, but there are 2 residential units that kind of wrap around that. Is that the courtyard you were talking about when you said?
The courtyard's the one in the center, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know how well it can function as a public space when you have 2 units with windows looking out on it.
I mean, it's no different than the units that face the sidewalk.
Yeah, but you're trying to encourage that to be an activated space, is what I was hearing.
Well,
That
right,
you
I
were-
mean, it's a key pedestrian street, so there's a lot of people walking down the street as well. So I think,
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
walking down. Well, I heard you saying
Yeah.
there was an intention to create an active space there, and I just,
right, I mean,
feel
most
like
of the activation is back in here, where there is no units and windows back on this side.
the drawings show there's windows there,
No, there's windows right here.
and on the other right there too.
Oh, yeah, back here, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it just feels like it's not gonna really work
I mean,
as an active space. And as I mentioned in the last review, there's almost like fire escape stairs going up and coming down from it. think there was a great opportunity for that to draw people in and for there to be some excitement. Right now, it's basically a void between buildings and a kind of a functional utilitarian stair going up and stair going down. I think the architecture is just trying way too hard. Like just the corner unit next to the Hayes and Lunsford building, that brown piece, there's one unit on the corner and it's articulated in three different pieces of, three different languages. There's that tall end volume, and then there's a recessed balcony, and then the other part of the unit is the other mass. So that one unit is expressed three different ways on the street, and it's just like, well, I wish you'd just calm the thing down. There's just way too much going on in my book.
I had a question. Has this project had the same owner with all of the reviews that we've gone through? Because, you know, it's a pretty dramatically different project now.
I can speak to that, yes.
Yeah.
Same
it's the
client.
Same owner, so I know we always like to point this out when this happens, but this project has come a long way in terms of improvements, and it's decreased size. There've been a lot of comments that were incorporated since our last meeting. I just think that, you know, it's a good example of how working together with the committee and with the developer, you know, the building looks better. I think it's going to be something that's more marketable. There's going to be a lot of competition on that street in a year and a half, 2 years. And it's come a long way. So, go ahead.
And if this is a, I'm sorry, process, is this, do we even vote on it if it's voluntary compliance? Okay.
They'll be able to move forward regardless of the recommendation.
Right. They can just, you know,
Our desire would be that these great conversations that are happening today, from Michael's comments to the adding the landscape area up against the building and so forth, that those follow this, follow us today as conditions or recommendations, so that as we continue forward, that stays in the staff report.
That's what I was asking. So some of what we're talking about today, we're throwing stuff up against the wall, asking the applicant to consider and think about, and some of these might be mutually exclusive. So I want to be careful, like what conditions we suggest and what recommendations we suggest when we do the vote.
I think it's all recommendations. There's no conditions.
There's no conditions.
You can call them conditions, and they'll be taken as recommendations, I think. If you want to be very explicit about it, you certainly can be. If there are things that you wouldn't recommend approval otherwise, then you can save them as conditions in a motion. And if they're just things that you think are nice little changes, maybe that's a recommendation. It gets a little bit semantical.
Well,
okay.
What if we go down and just indicate what we would like to strongly recommend?
Can I make a couple
Yeah.
comments first?
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for the presentation. And I go by this site twice every single day, and I've been thinking about it since the first time it came before us, and I was new on the committee. And what I've thought about is, as I go down the hill, this is going to set a precedent for all the development that is very similar in terms of land use and existing buildings on the way down, all the way to, I guess it's Morgan Avenue and Pfeiffer Street. And so just for us as a committee to make note that whatever we're saying and sending forward with you all could be referred back to for those future projects. So just as like, not as a requirement, but just as an example, like, for example, the great project on Hilliard and Ashland, they did X, Y, and Z. We can maybe push for something like that on other future projects. So positive feedback is important. And so, so when I see things like the rain garden in the site plan and the pervious pavement, wanting some stuff like that to stay as you move forward in the design, because those are important precedents for our downtown where we don't have a lot of that stuff, and we're asking for it. So I love that, and thank you so much for incorporating that and making our landscape spaces provide a service as opposed to just contribute to the aesthetic quality. I have a question about the streetscape on Ashland, because I like the landscaping. Landscaping in urban areas, I feel like is challenging, and we ask a lot of plants, and then they underperform, or they look like they're just trying to cover things up, but they don't do a good job of it, and then it just looks bad. And so wondering, so there's that statement that I don't think we have to have a heavy hand with the landscaping, and I don't think we can expect it to screen parts of the building or uses like a parking garage. Plants aren't going to do a good job at that. We have to design the architecture to stand on its own and then accentuate with plantings. And they should be thought of with the same degree of design as the architecture. And I was thinking about that street, and Ashland is not nice to walk up and down, and we're having more and more people living here. We have the school, the middle school there, we have the YW, we have, it's just a lot of pedestrians and more pedestrians using that space. And so I like the idea of having the street trees along the street to provide more of a nicer street environment, and then having those plantings so you're walking through vegetation and you're having that canopy, and even that little bit of a softness against the 4-lane street there, I think could be really nice. I don't know if that's possible at this point, but just wanted to ask the question if that is
Got
possible.
it outside the DOT right away, don't you? Yeah, I think we're COA, we're City of Asheville there. DOT's built more, anyway, I'll have to look at that. We've got them, we can, I'll
Just
take the
a-
recommendation and dig into it.
It's just a question, and
Right.
explore it, and there might not be a reason to do it, but just that might be nice. And then potentially,
In all reality, you know, it used to be everything in everything in tree grates, and then it was like, oh, if we've got an opportunity, let's not put it in tree
well,
grates.
I
And
was
so,
thinking you could have trees on both sides.
right.
I was thinking you could have the trees along the street, and then you could have that planted strip, and then you could have a vertical.
I don't know that the CBD rules would allow us to do a 5-foot planting strip like we might be able to do in suburban.
But
That'd be
you
my
have
only
it
thing.
along I'm saying where you have it right now.
I'm open for, I love the idea of a recommendation, and we can work with staff, because if it's allowed, I like the idea of not having to put trees in tree grates where they're confined. And I like the idea that you're presenting, and if the two can marry with public works and zoning, where. Utilities.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's probably a no, but just wanted to throw that out there. And then the other thing is, the southwest corner of the site, that is, you could bring up.
Down here?
Yes, so where South Grove Street comes up, right? And
Yes.
so we have all the single-family houses down there, and I see some plantings there, but just wanted to make a comment that, this is going to make a big impact to that neighborhood.
Right, and we, through neighborhood meetings and conversations, through the 3 different versions of this project, we were intentional about taking our landscaping and kind of pushing it down into that corner to the degree to kind of help buffer through there. And currently, right now, there's just the old Duke Power, when they owned it, there's just a big fence here. And so we're looking to open that up, as Clay said, for pedestrian connectivity, for multimodal to come through here, but not to introduce our vehicles through that neighborhood. Because right now, those neighbors have to go all the way down to Morgan to come all the way back around to be able to get to the central business district. So, but I hear you. That was our intention, was to take our landscaping and focus it in that area, especially a lot of our landscaping, building impact landscaping, things like that, or not building impact, but some of our VUA and so forth that we are required on here, and pushing it, as well as our tree canopy preservation aspects.
Thank you. I think that's all I have here.
Any other comments? We have a. Yes, let me open up for public comment. I believe there was one public comment online, which I believe you addressed in your
Yeah, the main
presentation.
point of the comment was, there are some mature trees on the internal portion of the site, but there's really no provision in the UDO that allows a building to come in that far away from the front setback. And that's what would it would substantially change the design, and it wouldn't be in compliance with the UDO.
Thank you. And do we have any public comment in the room? All right, so do we have a motion?
So I'm going to move to recommend approval and then open up for recommendations with that approval, if that's okay. I move to recommend approval of the adaptive reuse of the existing building and the new construction at 226 Hilliard Avenue as presented based on site plans, elevations, and materials submitted and discussions heard during this review. We find that the project meets the intent of the downtown design guidelines, subject to the following recommendations. One, that the applicant review the screening on top of the existing Hayes and Lunsford building, that the applicant review the design of the specific building elements along the south eastern portion along Ashland, specifically grounding the building with design elements, that the applicant review the window proportion and size in relation to the different building elements. I think that's most of mine.
If I can add, we would also recommend including the approximately 25-foot by 50-foot rain garden in the center of the site as a recommendation.
Retaining that, yes.
And the pervious pavement.
And the pervious paving on the southwestern portion of the site, that the applicant review with staff and other authorities having jurisdiction on the viability of incorporating or having the street trees along Ashland, and that the applicant review, I can't remember how I said it earlier, Chris, the appropriate landscape design between the required 10-foot sidewalk and the building edge. What other?
And to the extent that they're relying on the landscape to also make sure that they balance the seasonal types.
Okay. And did we have anything on that? Well, those are my recommendations. Any others? Okay. So moved.
Do we have a second? Is that?
I'll second it.
Okay. And do we have a vote?
Should we have further discussion?
What's up?
If you want to make another
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah, the screening of the rooftop mechanicals, the building on the corner of Klingman and Hilliard, play tennis at Aston Park, and it's supposed to be screened, and they're not. I'm just wondering, how do we actually enforce stuff like that happen? You don't notice it until the end of the project, so.
Is that the one that's under construction or the existing one?
The existing one.
Oh, yeah. Typically, staff reviews the final TRC submission for compliance with the zoning and then other approvals. And we look for that. That's a requirement outside of just the design guidelines. So, maybe either that was maybe missed in the staff review or the final zoning inspection. But if they're supposed to have it and they don't, that could be seen as a zoning violation. So that's could be an enforcement matter for an existing building, and under a review building, it's something that staff should catch as a requirement.
Well, maybe the condition, we punch up that however way we can punch it up so that it gets considered as it moves through the process. Because right now the drawings are not showing just a couple of those boxes stick up, the rest of them don't. So as buildings grow up tall around it, they're going to be, kind of looking at it. So anyways.
I think that's going to be handled currently under, the UDO requires mechanicals screening.
So they're screening or not visible from the right of way. I don't think it's, if the building's built next to it and someone's looking at it from their window.
Yeah, they can.
that's-
I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
I just meant,
It has to be
without
screened from the
understanding all the
street, though.
vantage points, right
Yeah.
now, it's possible that I think Hilliard might rise a little bit going west, and so, right now, the drawings don't indicate that there's parapets everywhere. So.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Any other recommendations? Was there a second? Yeah, Robin seconded.
And are we taking a vote?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those who oppose?
Opposed?
And we can move on to the next project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Alrighty, this is a design review request for a property at 130 Biltmore Avenue. It is classified as a level 1 project located in the CBD, so it's before you for a voluntary compliance mandatory review type process. Here is the site outlined. North is, gosh, I think north is to the right. It says it's to the top, but unless I'm turned around completely. North is to the right. You can see the property is just south of where Hilliard Avenue comes in at Biltmore. Currently existing about a half-acre site with an existing two-story mixed-use building and a surface parking lot in the CBD, outside the traditional core, in the intermediate height zone, and along Biltmore Avenue, which is a key pedestrian street. Here's some context photos. This is the existing historic building on the site. It's currently used as a doctor's office and residential and/or lodging uses. You can see to the left of that is a current surface parking lot on that same property. And then the kind of conceptual site plan, try to zoom in a little bit. You can see the existing building down at the bottom of the site, the surface parking, which would remain with this proposal, noted that it is a potential future development site. And then the proposed new building, which is at the back of the site, set into the slope as it slopes down to South Market Street Extension, which is kind of an alley, more or less, that splits off of where Market Street turns and meets back with Biltmore further north. So what's being proposed, let's flip down to one of the renderings actually, see a little bit better. Yeah, we'll go to this one here. So this is a view of the building from the rear on the east elevation along South Market Street Extension is a new 2- and 3-story commercial caretaker residence at this portion of the lot. It's essentially going to be 2 stories as seen from Biltmore Avenue, and then 3 stories as seen from South Market Street. You can see that the vehicular access and parking, which is in garages incorporated into the building, is from the rear of the building. It's South Market Street Extension. Let's see, some floor plans, giving a better sense of how the building works. So this is the lowest floor with the parking, the kind of middle floor, studio and bedroom, living space, and then the top floor, which for all intents and purposes, staff is considering to be the ground floor elevation as it faces Biltmore Avenue, since that is essentially what is on plane with Biltmore Avenue as demonstrated in this profile drawing. And you can see that the Biltmore Avenue side of the building is accessed through the existing parking lot by a pedestrian ramp that attaches to that top elevation. Some of the materials identified here, the majority of which is aluminum paneling. So the project meets the UDO design and operational standards, including items such as the siding height and massing. Certain aspects of the project meeting the design guidelines include the things such as access to the site located at the rear of the building, the minimum height of 2 stories in the CBD, and the fenestration details, which require a 20% opening requirement for upper story elevations. And then for this building, which is being considered a residential building, a 30% opening requirement measured linearly at the ground floor, which is this top floor facing Biltmore Avenue. The project would be basically considered exempt from the key pedestrian street requirement opening, as it does not front on the street. And the opinion being that since it's an accessory structure on the site, it would not need to have the 0-foot setback as new buildings typically do in the CBD. So that is one portion of the project that does not fully meet the design guidelines, but would be compliant with the zoning as far as staff's interpretation of that. And also be exempt from the requirement that 80% of the frontage is covered in building. Since it's not fronting on the street, that would kind of be void, but it does not meet that aspect of the guidelines necessarily. Also that the materials are synthetic and simulated finished systems, which are recommended against in the guidelines. Otherwise, the project is compliant with other portions of the downtown design guidelines, and staff recommends approval of this project. And I'm glad to answer any questions. I believe there's someone from the applicant team here. Yeah, I think the landscape architect or site designer is here as well to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Would you like to hear from the applicant?
Yes, do we have the applicant?
Yeah, would you like to speak or answer any questions the committee might have?
Yeah. I'm Larry Turner. I've owned this property since 1985. I was a dentist there for 30-something years. I've been living on the property in an apartment in the existing building for 8 years or so. And I have a partner now that we need more room, so we want to build this.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for comments on the architecture and the site, if we have any. Thank you.
I have a question about the potential future development there. So where will patients park if there's something built there, the parking lot goes away?
Yeah, it's a good question.
CBD.
Yeah, so there's no parking required for that use. So it wouldn't force the existing use into non-compliance, which is good. But I'd imagine any future development could have maybe any structured parking perhaps. Definitely would encourage that.
Any other questions? Comments?
My feeling is that hopefully at some point in the future, there will be a building on that parking lot. And as such, this accessory unit behind it is downhill, it'll be shielded. So I'm less concerned about some of the details about this.
We have a motion.
Should we do a public comment first?
Oh, can I open up for public comment? I don't think there's any online comments regarding this project. Okay.
I move to recommend approval of the 130 Biltmore Avenue project as presented based on site plans, elevations, and materials submitted, and the limited discussion heard during this review. Find that the project meets the intent of the downtown design guidelines. Any conditions? So moved.
A second?
And all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed?
Very good.
Move to the next project.
All right, soldiering along, you guys good for a little bit, or call a break at all, or
I got a hard 4 o'clock start.
hard 4 o'clock? We'll be out here by then.
I think he's hard 3:30.
3:20.
All right, well, I'll make this presentation brief, as brief as possible. It's a large project. It's a large project, so do
3 million
justice.
square feet.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal, yeah. So, good afternoon again, folks. This is a conceptual master plan review for a project known as Project Aspire. I will walk you through some of the background and the review process that makes this review a little bit unique to projects that you typically review. We also have a couple applicants with us, Robert Poppleton from the Furman Company, and Dave Crabtree, who's the architect on the project. So they'll be able to present a little more detail as necessary and answer questions as well. Essentially, what's being proposed is about a 1 million square feet in downtown to either side of the First Baptist Church. And there are a couple phases in this project that I'll speak to a little bit. Some pretty substantial buildings in total, and a good number of uses with a lot of mix and different uses going on. Kind of because of the size of the project, the phasing of it, which could take a number of years, the city has basically been in discussions and agreed around a review process with the applicant that would allow it to get kind of a conceptual master plan approval, which is something we don't typically do a lot in Asheville, but is more common in other jurisdictions. So essentially, what is being reviewed, now and over the next couple months or so, is a master plan of the site that enumerates the range of uses being proposed, the massing, the scale, the general characteristics, operations, layout, transportation, functions, and the like. That project would eventually, just like any other conditional zoning, be approved by City Council, and that would entitle the zoning and allow them to be able to eventually build what they're proposing, and be allowed by the zoning, just like a conditional zoning needs when it's over a certain size. They would be returning in a couple different phases for kind of handle like a level 2 project downtown, like the Duke kind of, except that if they, in order for them not to have to go back to City Council for a conditional zoning amendment, they would need your approval, kind of like a hotel project downtown. So
that's part of the CZ.
That's going to be written into the project conditions that gets reviewed and adopted by City Council.
And does the CZ limit or otherwise define the phasing plan? Will the applicant be allowed to modify the phases in which this is executed?
Yeah, that's something that we're going to need to refine a little bit more, but as of right now, I don't foresee it really.
I don't know that it's necessary from our point of view. I'm just asking a question.
That was something we heard at Downtown Commission, was how to ensure some of the phasing happens in a way that's still beneficial to the city, and something that we need to speak to a little bit more. I don't know if it would.
I mean, because part of what this is being billed as is there's affordable housing, there's other benefits that is part of this CZ.
Correct.
That's not really our purview in DRC, but in Downtown Commission, we're not super excited about it being backloaded, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the applicant's intention. I'm just asking procedurally how that's going to work.
Yeah, and we have been talking about that internally, so I don't have a great answer for you today, but it's something that we're going to be discussing and trying to get our heads around and what would be appropriate and permissible to ensure that the phases happen. You know, even if only one phase happens, it would still provide benefit to the city in the long run. So yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't have a great answer for today. But anyhow, that is kind of how the review process is being proposed. So what you're seeing in the application materials is more massing, blocky, vague than you would see for typical conditional zoning projects that are being reviewed by you all. But the catch being that while that allows for the plans to be refined over time and allow some flexibility in that design, they would have to come back and get your approval at the specific couple of phases that they're currently envisioning.
And I apologize, so I've had CZs before, and then we've made modifications. There's something in the UDO that kind of allows the planning director, if it's a minor modification, to allow that change to be happened. This was like, CZ was for X many square feet. We exceeded it a little bit by the time we came back, but they were able to say, okay, that's a minor change, and we don't have to go back through council.
Right.
With the conceptual master plan, where things are, a little fuzzier, where are the edges of that to when we will be approving it? In other words, how much onus is going to be on this to say, yeah, who decides if it's within the CZ, and
Yep.
no, that's a modification to the CZ, you need to go back to council?
Right, so some of that is handled a little bit at the staff level, but so this project will go to Planning and Zoning Commission and eventually City Council for this entitlement phase, but at the final review phase, it will go to Planning and Zoning Commission for ministerial review, where they will affirm if the project does in fact meet the zoning requirements like they currently do for downtown projects. So I think in the next round, let's say it gets entitled and there's a range of, because we're envisioning a range of uses, so it might not be a specific number of units, but it's going to be a range that's reasonable. And
We're even talking about potentially a range of height, right?
Correct.
It can be
Yep.
this or this or this or this.
Right.
So who
that's
decides? Is that P&Z or is that us?
I think that would be Planning and Zoning Commission, because they would be reviewing the zoning against the proposal, and the
Okay.
zoning would be the adopted conditional zoning that is being reviewed kind of now. But, and you all would be more approving the design against the downtown design guidelines in a more detailed review manner than we're doing today, since they'll have, more detailed plans and things like, specific windows and dimensions and the typical things that we see. So it's kind of how we envision it working. Obviously, things get a little blurry and spill across to different boards and commissions, which is fine. So that's kind of how we're envisioning it.
I'm still a little confused.
Yeah.
So if we were to affirm the project in this review, what are we actually affirming?
So that's a good question, because it's not a lot as far as details, but it is things like massing, building heights, which we'll get to, the characteristics generally, and I think if there are broader conditions or considerations that you all would like to see, that is something that could be considered in consultation with the applicant and part of the approval as well. But it would be more at a conceptual level.
Well, I'm seeing on the combined document on page 17 and 18, it kind of zeroes in on the zoning issues
Yeah.
that are building setbacks, step backs, heights, and things like that. And in red, there are half a dozen to a dozen requests for variances.
Yep.
So, and there's 6 buildings here. So if we were, it seems like in 1 or 2 of the buildings, it might be appropriate to relax something, but not across the whole site. So how do we handle that?
Yeah, so I will speak to those in a little more detail. I think the way to handle that is, you know, perhaps through a motion to approve with conditions. I don't think those conditions would be binding at this phase, but it could move forward to Planning and Zoning Commission for their consideration, and then they would be making recommendations to City Council eventually. And if there are certain parameters that you felt were more appropriate for them to, you know, receive modifications for than others, I think that's a great discussion to have today. Have it a little more defined, could be part of a motion, and that would, because it's a little more, this is functioning more at this phase like a traditional conditional zoning where a project is reviewed and doesn't have to get approval to move forward, but the applicant, it would behoove the applicant to get approval as it moves through the process. And any conditions that you put on that approval could be considered.
The way I've been trying to think about this one, Michael, is that it's almost like we're creating a form-based code for these parcels as part of this process, and then we're going to be applying that form-based code based on these documents from here forward.
So we're basically reviewing and approving kind of a conceptual master plan with some forms involved, and then we're going to review each building, and then we can zoom in on each building more specifically as to whether that building should be granted a variance for a step back or exceed a building height or something like that.
But based on the conditions that we're setting on it right now.
If you want to talk through some of those variables today.
I think I got it now.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit of a,
Ask one quick question.
Sure.
Bill? Has this changed at all since the last time we saw it?
little bit. Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to that. Yeah, so there have been some small modifications, so I'll keep the overview relatively brief since you all heard a much more refined version of the presentation from Dave at our informal design review meeting back in March. But so essentially, you know, same as before, there are basically 5 new buildings identified, and the colors here indicate the proposed uses. So the purple at Building 2 is proposed as a hotel use, up to 20 stories in height. Building 1 would consist of parking wrapped by residential and the new YMCA space. And let me see if it's on this one.
That's actually new too.
The hotel.
Building wrap on College Street. I don't think it was wrapped on College Street before the parking lot, right? The parking lot was open to, or Charlotte Street, sorry.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, that is something.
That we asked for.
Yeah, and they're still seeking a modification for that requirement, so I might let them speak to the intent of exactly where they're at and thinking about that screening, but I think they're trying to provide some level of screening along that. So this shows the phasing plan, which I think is important because phase 1 would consist of the demolition of the State Employee Credit Union bank at the College and Oak Street, and then the new hotel, mixed use, residential, commercial, and YMCA building. And then as soon as that YMCA building was occupied and the YMCA use moved to that corner of the block, of the kind of mega block, so to speak, the second phase could begin. And what that consists of is a mix of residential in 2 buildings, Building 2 and Building 3, and then I think those are phasing numbers. So what it actually is residential in Building 4, residential in Building 5 with parking in the interior, and then office, mostly office, in Building number 3. So a little more detail about some of the uses and the buildings. So let me go to one of these perspective views, actually. Sorry, I'm trying to find, I think it's in here. There's one that has a nice kind of exemplification of the height, and I might have skipped past it. Okay, yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, I kind of split these up a little bit. But what I'll do is I'll just. Yep. You're good. This is a pretty good one here. So, so here's building 2, a 20-story hotel and lodging building at the corner of Charlotte College and Oak. See building 1 behind it, 6 stories with the residential, retail, and YMCA. Building 3, which is the office and retail building in the blue and the red, 6 stories, as well as a 6-story residential building behind, and then a 19-story residential and retail building. So some new figures that were submitted as part of this review process is a pedestrian connectivity kind of map showing you know, where connections would be internal and external of the site, as well as bicycle connectivity diagram showing those connections, as well as the 2 existing transit stops also. Let's see here. So I might speak to those technical modifications a little bit. So, you know, staff has provided a review of the project against the design guidelines, some of which is a little difficult because it is, you know, master plan level review at this phase and not as detailed, but finds that the project is supported by a number of the design guidelines, including things such as street orientation and lot layout, height and massing. So it obviously meets the minimum 2 stories and is within the maximum height allowed per the 2 different tallest height zones and intermediate height zones. So tallest height zones are on the exterior portions of these sites, and then the intermediate height zones are closer to the church, which I think helps with the vision of the design for the preservation of view sheds to the church and to not overwhelm the First Baptist Church. That was a big consideration of the project generally. So other parts of the guidelines that the project would be required to meet are things such as you know, ground floor fenestration and facade openings. I should mention that basically all the streets surrounding this development, Charlotte, College, Oak, and Woodfin, Charlotte, and then Central on the west side are all key pedestrian streets. So there are those enhanced requirements for openings that the project would be required to meet, as well as the standard 20% for windows and openings on upper stories, as well as that, you know, entrances are along the building edge, along the curb. A few of the design guidelines, which also refer back to the UDO requirements that the project is either proposed to not be in alignment or only partially aligned with going forward, for which they are going to be seeking technical modifications through the conditional zoning process, are things such as the front setback requirement of 0 feet. And this is more, I think, to allow the project to consider a little bit more of an enhanced, I guess, sidewalk and public realm depth and more room to work than either right against the property edge or right against a 10-foot sidewalk. So the intent is, as you can tell, not to set the buildings back in a more suburban way, but really just to provide the flexibility for them to have a little more enhanced public realm.
Is that every building?
That would be generally a blanket for the entire project, yeah. You know, oftentimes staff allows some flexibility with that as long as buildings are up against pavement and sidewalk edges. Essentially, it's as long as it's not a grass, you know, planting strip between the building and the sidewalk is basically what that requirement is trying to avoid. But essentially, that is going to be a modification that would not hold them to be required for that part of the UDO, which is also a guideline in the downtown design guidelines. Another modification is regarding parking garages on key pedestrian streets. So that is,
Has that been remedied then? I think it has been.
Yeah, our technical modifications really we should go back and look at this collectively.
Okay.
Because we've been making changes based on conversations over the last several meetings, so in some of them the parking deck, for example, we have liner and massing variations that have been addressed.
great. So, no, thank you. So yeah, I think, so some of these will be kind of changed, and some, I think, trying to find, it might be technically a modification, but it would be more of a relaxing of some of these requirements. So as previously submitted, the key pedestrian street requirement for parking decks on Charlotte Street would be waived, but I know they heard loud and clear from a number of boards and commissions and staff that some kind of treatment along Charlotte Street at the ground level is going to be really important. So I know they've been working on that. So I think they can speak a little more to how they're addressing that requirement and whether they even need a modification as the project moves forward. There are a number of requirements for either step backs, both at the street wall height. So typically projects are required to have a 10-foot wide step back at about the 2 or 3 story mark, depending on the in this case, the width of the right-of-way. Now, some of these right-of-ways are over 75 feet wide, and therefore a step back is not required, and that would be more on Woodfin and Oak and College Street, perhaps Charlotte. It would be required more on narrower streets like Central Avenue, but they are seeking a modification for that. And my understanding is that while they want to articulate the buildings, they also want relief from that kind of very stringent 10-foot by for 2/3 of the building length at that street wall height. So that's another modification. There are also 2 more modifications for buildings above 75 feet in height. Basically, the idea being that buildings over 75 feet have to significantly reduce their floor plate design to about, in this case, 40% of the 40% of the lot area. So it involves a little bit of math, but essentially it would reduce the floor plates above 75 feet by perhaps almost half, which they're seeking relief from. Also, there's requirements that for floors above 75 feet, the maximum horizontal dimension in any direction is limited to 145 feet for the first floor above that, and then presumably they're forward. So they're seeking a modification for that as well. So the project has been reviewed informally by this committee back in March. There's a lot of discussion about the public realm, the street section widths internal to the site, and trying to make them obviously compliant with fire and access standards, but also have them function as an urban street. Green stormwater infrastructure, thinking about kind of vehicular movements, improving the gateway to the site from the other areas of downtown, particularly along Charlotte Street, inviting people into the site, not just around it, working on some specific design considerations like this corner of Charlotte and College Street, so it's something that activates the street. It's not just like a leftover area. Celebrating kind of the eclectic nature of the First Baptist Church into the design of the new buildings, considerations about the phasing, as previously mentioned, and then one design item that was explicitly addressed is kind of the flipping of the upper story step backs of the 2 tall buildings. So before, the taller portion abutted College Street and Central Avenue.
That was discussed by one person.
Yeah, who's taking credit for that?
No, that was Andrew, I think, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Just keep going.
Yep. So opinions might vary, but that was
Yes.
one idea expressed to provide more relief to the streets and then have the taller portion interior to the street. There are also a number of comments shared at the Downtown Commission last Friday. Things like the amount of affordable housing and workforce level affordability in the project, more discussion about green building and innovative stormwater stormwater management techniques like green roofs. Preservation of the large maturing street trees along Oak and Woodfin Street where possible, which I believe the project is intending to do. Trying to create more continuity in design between these taller buildings and the relatively shorter buildings to reduce those discrepancies. Again, designing the internal streets to function more as public streets and not feel like private areas of the development, and also ensuring that new buildings relate in some design consideration to existing buildings and historic buildings in the area. So that is pretty much my presentation, hitting the high notes there. Not want to take more time than necessary. Staff is recommending approval of this conceptual master plan for the project. But I know we have the applicants here. They might be able to provide more detail and to answer any questions. I'd be glad to answer any questions you all may have for me as well.
You're saying staff recommends approval for the master plan, but not for conditional zoning?
Yeah, so it would be the conditional zoning technically. So we're calling it we're calling it a conceptual design, but then a conceptual master plan that kind of takes the vehicle of a conditional zoning.
So, are they, procedurally, you go from here to P and Z?
Correct.
And then directly to council?
That's correct.
Okay, so when are the actual conditions going to be written down?
So they'll be ready.
P&Z?
Yeah, they'll be ready in advance for the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. We're currently working on scheduling a special meeting for June 21st that would allow for the review of this project solely. And they would be reviewing those conditions, those project conditions, and talking about any other ones as appropriate.
And when we vote today,
Yep.
this is a voluntary compliance with us?
Correct, yep. So your conditions could be,
But they're gonna, our conditions are gonna go to P and Z, and they could incorporate them if they're smart.
correct. The applicant could consider them in the meantime, working with staff, and
You
they
said
could.
yes.
Yes,
That's great.
yes.
And then when we review each building
Yep.
individually, it's mandatory compliance? Did
That's
I understand
correct.
that correctly?
Yep,
Okay.
so any conditions that get incorporated, the massing, so let's say they, they're showing a 20-story building for the hotel, and that's the maximum written into the code, let's say, into the project conditions, and they come back with a 25-story building, even though it maybe meets the max building height in the zoning, technically in the CBD, that would be something that would be clearly out of the realm of what they got approved for. So yeah.
Can you give us a reference of the proposed height is, I saw it on a diagram for the hotel, is 265. Indigo, what's the height on that?
Oh, I should show you. Is that right? 13.
I feel like we've talked that this would be the tallest building downtown. I feel like that's come up. Yeah.
Okay, so this
This would be.
without precedent, okay, gotcha.
It's fairly compatible to your tallest building, if you look at the equipment and overruns and things like that. We may be taller, depending on who takes the measurement and Emporium data, there's other places that measure these
Yeah,
things.
you're lower down the hill than the BB.
Right.
I still call it the BB&T. I'm so sorry to hear it.
There's about 50 foot of slope on our side alone, just to give you a sense from.
Speaking about height, though, we talked about it at Downtown Commission, and I was building 1, and the left building 3 were taller.
Yep. So one of the things we talked about is that there's a nice diagram that shows the height in a more analog kind of thing, whereas this is very digital, and we were just saying that it would be nice, or it might be preferable. And obviously this depends on, as you go up, it changes building type, yada, yada, yada. We understand that. But I think that, we'll back up a couple. There's two. There's that one in plan, and if you go up one more, Will, that's the one. That's it. So that one was showing, more of and we were just saying, you know, that there could be more variation in height than what you're currently showing, and you could get a little bit more height in the ones that Robin said. I don't have them memorized.
No, I'm looking at.
Okay.
And I think that brings up an interesting point too, because I know that the First Baptist Church is an integral part in the project, but, you know, keeping those buildings down lower, and the taller buildings, more people have to use the church. But we're not considering the overall site. I see what you're saying about the overall site.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of things going on here, and we really need to, I guess, focus in on conditions as much as anything. Do we have any questions for Will?
I have a question about the traffic impact. Is there like talk of like doing a DOT study and seeing?
Yeah, there will be a traffic impact analysis required. There was a preliminary one done that basically was a kind of a trip generation analysis that showed beyond a doubt that a traffic impact study would be required. So some of those recommendations, you know, could be part of the requirements and the project conditions that they would have to handle going forward as well.
So again, Will, what the applicant staff is looking for us to do today is to have a vote with any specific conditions that staff can pass along to P&Z that can be incorporated. Otherwise, I mean, things we like, don't like, doesn't really matter. We're trying to get to a set of conditions that you can write for a CZ that can then be enforced.
That's correct, and those will be incorporated per the applicant's agreement into the project conditions, and ones that aren't will still be noted and brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission's attention.
And we don't have to bring up, because it's already going to be part of the conditions, that they come back to DRC for mandatory compliance for each individual piece.
Correct.
Thank you. And what will we be enforcing? The downtown design guidelines as currently written, or as they're amended?
That's a good question. I know if they get amended in the meantime.
In other words,
we
come up with a green roof requirement between now and the next thing that exceeds what the applicant is about to promise. I'm just throwing that out there as a potential. Are they bound by current? Because I don't know how you bind them to future.
Yeah, I know for zoning changes, there's a Permit Choice Act, I think it's called, where if you get approved for a project today under today's zoning.
Exactly.
But you want to build in a year from now and the zoning changes, you can choose which zoning you want to comply with.
But you have to do, you can't a la carte, you can't pick from each one. You have to go pick one or the other.
Full one or full the other, right. So I would imagine we would apply a similar review to this one.
In other words, so 5 years from now, they come back to DRC for building 72.
We might need to use the old guidelines.
Which set of guidelines are we applying?
You know, it could be.
I would like that understood a little bit.
Yeah, I
imagine they would
don't know the answer to that. That has not come up before. That's something we can figure out and either have an agreement in place with the applicant through the project conditions, or
I would make that as part of the project conditions. That is the current design guidelines.
Yep.
Just to make it clear.
Current at the time.
Current at the time of the application.
As of today.
As of today.
Yeah, I think that would be the clearest way.
And if so that if we think that there's something else that should be in there, we need to make that condition now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to hear from the applicant or ask them any questions? Probably. Okay. You're welcome. Do you want to come up and give any more information I missed, or answer any questions folks might have?
I would love to. I'm happy to share. You guys have the presentations on your computer or anything like that?
Yeah, we have it here. So this is the combined one here. So yeah, feel free to come up and you can flip through it as needed. Yep.
You got anything else?
So this is the combined set of plans, and then you can just scroll up and down with the two fingers. We're kind of in the middle here, so
yeah.
Feel free to introduce yourself and show any more information.
See if I can. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
It's like playing the old.
Scratching record there.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name's Dave Crabtree. I'm architect with Hive Workshop, and our client, Furman Group, and of course, the Y and the church respectively. I think, I'm not sure how many of you, I know Michael's been on some previous calls and informal reviews. We've done several calls, so I've lost track of who may or may not have been. We do appreciate all the feedback. I do think many of the conditions that we've asked for, the technical modifications, we've been trying to address them along the way, partly because it's a big project. And the intent has always been to create a pedestrian-friendly urban environment, respecting your code, but only asking where we thought something might be needed. So I'll kind of go through them a little bit and best on my memory. Not hitting all the setbacks, for example, or build 2 lines, if I can. When you look at the master plan, for example, here if I can find it, there's many areas where the park space, if I could center this right, that would be a non-build 2 line, for example. That really wouldn't meet your code, but it's very specific to frame views and vistas of the church steeple. And so those are the areas that we're thinking. The corners, for example, because it is a larger project, those are areas where we think having some spatial relief on that type of corner as people are approaching, I'm sparing you guys some of the analysis that we did on granularity and development patterns and even thinking about your skyline, how it's really points on a sky, right? You're not a solid skyline. So things when you think about our sort of what we call the mountain and the valley, the 2 respective end caps of the hotel and the residential building 4, for example, those are kind of framing it. I'll speak to those in just one more second. If I can find back to sorry, this is not, I'm driving this thing for the first time. So technically, if you see here, we could build to 265 foot in those areas. And so some of our requests above the 75 foot is looking at the totality of the site. So instead of trying to build and fill that with the maximum height possible, and then the intermediate zone, which we could build to 145 foot in the green, we're sort of self-imposing, if you will, the sort of mountain in the valley. To your point, could building, some of the buildings in the back here are very limited in their construction type because they are intended to be residential, and so that one, the 2 office buildings, should they grow a floor or something? It's possible. We've tried to give a max min and say, well, we'll have 150,000 square foot of office. Don't quote me on that number, but for example, and if it grows to 120 or down to 125 or to 160, those could be. They are right in that line of it's 70 foot to the right and 90 foot to the left. So we're not high rise on the building to the right, but we are on the left, and it's hard for us to say that. So I like the comment, and I could see that variation happening. It's somewhat going to be
market-driven.
Yeah, parking-driven, market-driven, and just the individual users, because there will be multiple teams coming in. This is not like Dave Crabtree coming in and designing all these buildings.
Oh, that's
so,
too bad.
Yeah, no. Well, maybe. I do love y'all's design review board. I was watching your comments, so it's really fun to be a part of.
When you're not in front.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But it is about creating a design environment, right? These buildings are here for a long time, and the Furman Group respects that. In the church and YMCA respect that as well, absolutely. So those are some of the, back to the height, we have also kind of created a church, sort of we call the dome zone, these yellow areas, and stepped it down further. So that's kind of some of the logic that came up. I want to, and then of course we're creating a non-build zone, really adjacent there, which is intended to be that sort of park space. Now we are in master plan, and overall, as I come back to this, you're looking at, we've tried to strip the buildings down to make them just masses. So we don't imagine this is just going to be a blank place of grass. That might be a place where rain gardens and other sort of features that have come up in the past. They're passive, active lawn activities, cornhole to a place for kids to play, fountains. We don't really know what we don't know yet. So we do anticipate those sort of things. What we've tried to use is that language in our, kind of mimicking your language and enhancing in some cases. So activated pedestrian facade. So when we point at a facade, we've tried to put precedent images that give you some sense of where we would be heading, in trying to be in the spirit of your code. I want to address very specifically the, I don't know if I can find, we have the massing prior, we were keeping only our office building, because again, it was going up above the 75 foot, so we were trying to keep that as a smaller footprint. As we were asked to move to residential, we started to need, we're at only 200, excuse me, not even 200, about 140 units, if my memory's right, which is very modest for a residential deal in this sort of U-shape. So somebody mentioned, hey, that mass is different. It is different because we were trying to, bring in some of the workforce housing. And so now we went from a more singular, what used to be just a singular sort of pop-up in the parking deck staying low, to the mass thing that you see now. So that's part. That's still around 80 foot is our goal, and that gets into, or 85 foot, which gets into back to residential product. To be in a stick-built, you can do hybrid construction and be up to 85 foot before it has to go to concrete. If it went to concrete, then it would kill the deal, essentially. The cost wouldn't work. Trying to go through and see if we can find. Very specifically, we addressed the conversations around, addressing some level of corner design. Again, these are masses to give a sense of what, you mentioned form-based code. The final design may not have that exact same footprint, but it's like, hey, we need to design a corner there and create a recess, a little garden. In terms of the lower pedestrian scale, bringing sort of liner space very specifically down to the street. And so we wanted to make sure to address that. So in that way, that technical modification really, comes off. And so that was one very specific area.
So the intent is not, on these massing models in the preferred master plan, the intent is not to bind yourself to a specific massing model per se, but this is showing conceptually how it could be applied. Is that
Right, because there's a separate hotel group designing a hotel. I'm not going to be dictating them exactly how, they'll be following the general massing form. So for example, the request for them to make a viable footprint, those are around a 15,000 square foot floor plate, which is tiny. I know they look big because they're tall, but that gives them the number of units they need. And so they'll be filling that kind of envelope, but their corner may not be shaped exactly that way. They would be playing with recesses and, defining the corner, but it may vary slightly. And that's where we feel like the second round of what I call CZ 2.0, I could be using the wrong language here. We're in CZ 1.0 in my brain, and 2.0 would be future, where we come back the hotel, and
it would actually just be the application of the CZ, if I understand it correctly. Right. You don't want to do a CZ 2.0 because that takes you back.
Well, it's like the second round when we would come back by building in for us is phase 2. So I shouldn't use this 2.0 language because that's specific to you guys, but.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah, sorry.
Now, I would say that like all of the kind of vignette language architecture that you're showing, and even in the massing, lends itself to a modern contemporary design, aesthetic and language. Is there the potential for if somebody wanted to do, if you had a different team and they came in and wanted to do the office buildings and wanted to make it more traditional, more, not matchy historic, please don't do that. But you understand where I'm going.
I do. Yeah, that would, I think, add texture and scale and character to the development. So
okay.
These images, our teams are, I'm a reflexive modernist. I design in all sort of variations, and it's reflexive of context and scale and brand and telling a story.
100%.
But the images are kind of coming from our team, so yes, they could vary in style.
I want to kind of make that part of the fabric of this CZ is that we're not limited, and I know that was not not your intent to limit the language
Right.
to what's in the master plan, but we are voting on this as presented, and I want to make sure that that we have the full rich palette of design available
Yeah.
to all the upcoming applications.
Yeah, in our mind, they're performative, not prescriptive, right? So they're showing scale and texture and breaking down the pedestrian views and
100%.
that sort of.
But none of it, I mean, we could all walk out the door and get hit by a bus. It's a different group
Yes, sir.
that's doing it. They're like, well, these are the images. This must be what they wanted. So this is all we can do.
Right.
That's a good point.
And then that's other
Be
areas.
careful when you walk out.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, that'd be a tragic accident.
Sorry.
They should be upset.
All of us.
Sorry. It's getting late. I'm
I'm
tired.
struggling as to how to articulate, kind of affirming the study, which I think is really cool. And I wish more projects would separate the architect from the master planning, because I think it frees it up. So you got one brain kind of looking at forms and stuff, and then architects follow behind it and realize that. I think hopefully it'll be a much better project. Hopefully, if at least 3 or 4 different architects are involved, unless you can change your hats really good.
Even in large I put my I have an urban design background as well as architecture. And so for me, I struggle with big projects like this as an architect.
It's
Like you
tough.
guys, I've lived in Hong Kong and other places, and the granularity is hard to obtain as a singular architect to think you can design buildings like this. And anytime when we do the illustratives over this, we usually bring in 5 or 6 of us, say, I'm gonna take this corner, you take this
That's
corner.
right.
So even you're trying to build in, sorry, I'll stop, but I
We
know.
talked about that on a previous project, didn't we?
Yes.
And that would, there are some illustratives in here, what phase 1 could look like, and those aren't designs either. And we've talked about doing those for the whole site, but it's like when you do that, it would be us doing that, and it would be fake architecture anyways, and for future architects to come in.
Well, I guess what I was trying to get to is that I'm in favor of giving flexibility, but I don't know how to set conditions on that. Like, yeah, we can let go of the step backs and setbacks, but not on the whole site and not every building, right?
Well, but so I think we've already got what they're asking for. So
Right.
they're asking for specific flexibility on the setbacks, specifically as shown on the current design. Specifically at the intersection of Central and Woodfin, on the intersection of Oak and College, intersection of College and Charlotte, and then on the approach from Woodfin towards the church. Those are the places that I see the specific setbacks requested. And then they've asked for specific setback areas, again, along the College Street, the big building there, and then along Central Avenue. They've asked for those building step back requirements in those areas, the length of the building. So they have done that at least illustratively, and I think we bind into that. And that was actually why I brought up that, in my mind, this wonderful, you've created the form-based code here, and that's what we're gonna, whether it's us or some other group 5-10 years from now, is gonna refer back to. That's why I wanted to make sure we had the illustratives referenced correctly, because memories aren't as long as we would hope they would be.
Yeah.
So I think they've done that. I think they've done that with this document that can be as part of the conditions. Now,
Can we just talk about the hotel, for instance? So you're saying, like, I'm seeing that after the second floor, it actually articulates a little bit, either pops in or pops out?
Yeah, it's a 5-foot articulation. And technically on Charlotte and College and Oak, there are no step back requirements because the right-of-ways are greater than 70 foot. Now, we're still showing them at 5 foot because as big as this site is, believe it or not, it actually gets tight when you start throwing in the structural dimension of a parking deck and some of the other uses. So we are trying to respect that. Technically, we are,
I guess I'm not saying really good view, looking at the face of the hotel. We're seeing some oblique views from corners. So I'm a little uncomfortable just giving them a pass on any of that, but I think if it's done well, it could work. But and same thing coming up Woodfin, next to the current Y. Is that the name of that street? That tall building, that residential building,
Do you mean
seems a
Central?
little monolithic to me, and I
Yeah, but is he talking about Woodfin?
don't want to let go of any articulation at this second, third floor completely.
And our thought was that comes in under design, because if we mass these, then we're, you know, the,
So Michael, to your point, if you have it, this is where we can help P and Z today, is that what we need to do is say that we are in recommendation of accepting those variances to the, forgive me, the step back in the building, you know, the length of the building, as long as the final building design meets the spirit, the intent of the downtown design guidelines for articulation and variety in the facade. Just like that.
right, so like four
Somebody write
corners
that
for,
down. That was good.
right, that is perfect. Four Corners, I think, does that, right? That building is exceeding
100%.
75 foot tall. It's definitely longer than 140 foot, above 75
Grove
foot. But
Arcade.
somewhere, somebody, they designed in it like a recess, but it didn't cut the buildings in two. Those are the types of things in the future we would imagine a design team
Yeah.
taking those, because nobody's gonna, well, I think your code, once you look at fenestration guidelines and transparency and all that, articulation of every 20 feet, there's a lot of other layers here that are gonna tell these buildings what they wanna be, was
I
our,
mean, the Grove Arcade's a good bit longer than 145
Right.
feet. And it's well articulated, and everybody likes walking beside it. So, you know, we've got local examples even
Right.
of that, where that can be done well. Now granted, it's not 200 feet tall, it's supposed to be, but,
And they sure set back that, you know, that upper story.
yeah, yeah.
I think that building two, I'm more comfortable with the variance than building four. Building four to me just does not fit the scale of Central Avenue.
Central.
right, that's
But
building.
there is one view that does show a bit of a step back, but one of the last.
It does.
It's got like this little hole in it, right? Is that the one?
Well, there's no hole in it, and Robert was very clear to say, Dave, we can't show holes in our buildings. It may or may not have had a hole in it at some point. I grew up in Miami, and the Architectonica building there, it always amazed me as a beautiful,
Page 45, there's a view.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
see if I can get to it, sorry again for.
Keep going.
What we did do is address the massing and step it down towards the street edge. And again, that is the 265-foot zone, you know, by right, but trying to keep it, you know, so I wouldn't, some architect in the future would not have those recesses there, but what we were trying to say is, look, you're not gonna go more than 145 foot without having some level of doing something on the building. And this may not be the best way to represent that as a form base, but it was our attempt. And then what you'll notice is step performance guidelines saying animate and articulate massing above 75 foot, step back massing at the skyline. So we've tried to add language that would be performance-based and not get too prescriptive, is where we were, you know, trying to accommodate comments to date. And then show a couple of examples that are, you know, doing those sort of things.
Well, it's one of those things with good architects, you give them a lot more freedom, but then if it's a bad architect, you wish you handcuffed them a little bit more.
Well, I've seen your level of comments on the second round of design when people are coming back with illustrative, so I'm assuming you're gonna be very astute. One other thing that came up was about defining a gateway, you know, for example, and that a pass-through that comes through there, so, you know, so that has been a performance-based thing to say, hey, there would be a gateway along Central. We are, you know, there is a step back. We are stepping back the building 5 foot in lieu of the 10 foot that the code says. Central is one of the streets that is like a 65 foot right away, so it's would require a step back, and that was, we're to try to keep sidewalks and depths of buildings. We're already at 72 foot for a residential tower, and if we went to a 10-foot step back, now you're into a different footprint, and it just not viable for a lot of the clients that would be taking that particular site.
That's the primarily residential building.
Well, going with that, I mean, at this point, we couldn't tell whether it was a 5-foot or a 10-foot step back.
We've performed it where we've said, we've requested it at 5 foot, because we know.
Oh, that's in here somewhere?
That's in the technical modifications, yeah.
Okay. So I guess one of the conditions would be maybe not release all 5 of that feet. Like maybe we do still want 10 feet, I don't know.
I think that's a problem in residential buildings, personally. I think the setbacks are nightmares when you get a tall residential building.
Yeah, but just the height of that, and it's facing a building that will soon be under construction, right? That may or may not have stuff it wants to react to, so it's just hard to just say, forget about step backs on that side.
Yeah, we had a lot of heartburn on that project, on that side of
There's
that
not
building.
much to react to.
No, because that, you know, they kept all that stuff, and they didn't do a ton at the corner. Well, I think some of this, so that bit, I don't have a problem with the stuff on College, the hotel piece, the Phase 1 Hotel Y piece. It's this end of the site that I'm somewhat struggling with, just because of the size of that building, knowing how many people are coming from the north, coming underneath, and coming up Central to come into town, and how many are going to be engaged with that. Now, you have things like articulate ground levels with pedestrian scale and active street design.
Right.
But you're taking what right now, you know, is walking beside the Y, and it's going to become walking beside a pretty big building that's going to limit your sunlight and everything. So I don't know how to strengthen that language to find gateway along Central. I'm just trying to think about like what we can say to make sure that, as someone just said, you know, that if we do get a mediocre, not that you're going to hire a mediocre architect on purpose, but we're out there, and you know, sometimes we snooker you. So, you know,
Sometimes we slip right into this.
we just get on the commission.
Hey, look, I'm only an architect 3 out of 7 days, so I don't know.
So, how do we, because like I can see how that could be a great building.
I think some of the language on the drawings of the Y at the bottom at pedestrian level could work in that instance and would not meet the step back requirements.
Are you saying over here?
If you go down, it's the only sketch.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is,
So where the building is kind of pulled back and there's an overhang instead of a step back.
right.
I think some of that language could work along Central, but I don't know how you incorporate it.
Well, in some ways, we've built in the language that in our technical modifications that are trying to support that. So it's
Well,
basically.
it says articulated, pedestrian, friendly, I can't remember now.
Well, in we've kept shorthand in this presentation. There's technical modifications where we say 2/3 of the facade will be an animated facade, could step in between 3 and 5 stories, because some of your street wall gets pretty tall. And so our concern even here was like, well, if you put a 6-story wall along Central, you might as well just put a 20-story tower against it, because, you know, versus a 2-story to 3-story. So in the technical modification, we did try to loosen the language to lay, you know, a lower street wall, if you will. And then the 5-foot step back above those areas. And then this is kind of illustrative of what starts to happen when you do that. But and really that internal, what we've called Fellowship Way, there's no, you know, we're designing it, but it's an internal street, you know.
Well, I think the point you made about Central being pedestrian and the massive building against the pedestrian environment. I think the same thing's happening on College, and we have the East End Valley neighborhood that could really benefit from more accessibility into, this area as well. And so thinking about wider sidewalks in general, like more than the minimum,
Right.
I think will really help accomplish what we're seeing in all of your precedent images.
And it
the
doesn't have to be
renderings.
consistently wider, it can be, vary in and out with the building, just giving pedestrians,
Right.
enhancing that pedestrian experience.
Yeah, so for example, along Oak, we have a 10-foot sidewalk, but we have about a 20-foot area because of the planting buffer. So
That feels different,
and that's
right?
because we're trying to keep those existing trees, and at that point, we don't have the intrusions of the 5-foot tree grates into the sidewalk, so it was okay to have a 10-foot minimum there. That's similar in front of the Y here, along as Oak and Woodfin as well. So for the most part, we have, greater than 10-foot area assigned to pedestrian, but we might only have 10-foot of walkway. But then you have the planting zone. That happens along College, Charlotte. As you come off of 240, for example, we've moved a planting zone along that edge and kept a wide sidewalk, putting the planting zone along the street to give some kind of buffer, because as much as we want that to be a pedestrian street, it's still a vehicular, people are moving pretty fast there.
I want to say I appreciate you shielding the parking, the structured parking from Charlotte Street with a liner building and turning that corner, the intersection of College and Charlotte. And so by showing it here now, we are locked into that, right? So there's no going back. So for instance, since you turned that hotel and didn't leave that break facing that intersection there of College and Charlotte, is there anything by approving this that would keep you from shifting that hotel towards that corner a little bit?
What Michael's asking about is that he has wished that crazy little right turn only thing wasn't necessarily there. And that if you could work that out with the city, could you then extend it over without having to come back through everything? Am I interpreting
Well,
it
I just feel like we have the remnants of a 60s kind of traffic pattern, and it's kind of a gateway. And I think you're trying not to engage that intersection. And I think maybe if you engage it and we don't fix the pavement, that maybe that intersection actually gets better somehow, becomes more urban.
That's a good point,
Yeah, I mean, I would love for that to be an active corner. The challenge is you currently have a sort of a speeding right turn where people are still doing 60 miles an hour coming off I-240, and maybe it's 40, but.
And it's like 6 lanes wide or something.
Right.
So, but the question is, you still have latitude with this possible approval to kind of shift that building a little bit and maybe address that intersection a little bit differently?
I think so, especially in the future design phase. The goal there would be to articulate the corner and create that does seem like a place where, I don't know, it depends on what happens with the traffic pattern. If traffic was slower there, then you have more room to push more building forward and, not have as much relief for pedestrians. That's I don't know what the final layouts will be for the hotel, but they are talking about some meeting spaces and things like that. So you could imagine if there were courtyards there, that might be a place where some of their amenity space spills out onto the corner for some outdoor seating, for example. Their entrance is intended to be on, Oak Woodfin corner, which is a more appropriate place for them. So I'm not really answering your question as much as just giving.
I'm just hoping, I'm going to be supportive of this. I'm just hoping that support also allows some evolution on that corner.
I think maybe
just
that'd
like
be a
coming
condition.
out of the tunnel.
Yeah, we can include it as a recommendation.
An opportunity that if it comes back for the second round of review and somehow, the DOT and the city works together to normalize that intersection in a more urban pattern, which I think everyone would have been in agreement with, and the building could respond differently to it. And
I got a hard stop at 4, guys. I'd love to make a motion, and we can all add our conditions. Can we go to public comment? Dave, I'm
Yes.
sorry to cut you off.
That's cool, I'm just
I'm
trying
trying to move you through.
To move to public comment, there was one comment online, which I think we've addressed. Most of the comments, they were regarding Charlotte Street and the conditions there. And then do we have any public comment in the room?
We have the church and the wise.
All right.
Hello to both.
I'll make a motion. You ready? I move to recommend the approval of the contextual design of Project Aspire as presented based on site plans, elevation materials submitted, and discussions heard during this review, and find the project meets the intent of downtown design guidelines subject to the following conditions.
Long
Join
blank.
in on me there.
Long blank.
As discussed, that the proposed architecture, the proposed architectural precedents include a broad range of architectural styles and contextual responses. That the applicant continue to, or that the proposed designs engage, exceed the UDO requirements for sidewalk widths, and what else?
Bike lanes. Minimum sidewalk widths.
Where appropriate and as shown in the conceptual master plan documents, that the applicant, what do we say about the stormwater? I'm trying to remember what we said at downtown design.
Incorporate green stormwater infrastructure, prioritize green stormwater infrastructure over conventional underground stormwater detention
There we go.
at grade and on rooftops.
There we go. That the applicant protect as many trees as practical, and that any future plantings exceed the size and number of the UDO requirements.
Anything specific to the setbacks?
Yeah, I would say,
I don't think I would say that.
Yeah, I know.
I would say consideration of the pedestrian scale along Central and College and Charlotte.
Okay.
Activation and scale.
Activation and scale.
Absolutely.
Activation, building articulation and scale. There we go.
The wider sidewalks, when I said it as appropriate, especially we're not providing step backs exceeding street wall heights and exceeding max dimensions. And also engaging, what do I have here?
You had one about engaging East
Yes.
Valley neighborhood, but I think.
So developing a relationship with East End Valley neighborhood to mitigate construction impacts, help build community capacity, and just as we're considering with the Central Avenue pedestrian environment, other neighborhoods in the area.
And the intersection, something about the intersection?
The possibility of working with
Charlotte Street.
Building could be
Well,
addressed.
yeah, I don't know, it is what it is right now, the property line is the property line. If that gets changed, how would we say that? That, in the event that the property line and the existing interchange at Charlotte Street and, I'm blanking. College, is modified, that the applicant has the ability to shift the proposed hotel building towards that intersection and engage that corner.
I wouldn't necessarily put
Not
it
as a
that
condition.
specific.
Not as a condition.
Right.
How would you say?
I would just, activate the corner, engage the
Activate
corner,
the
but not
corner.
necessarily sliding the hotel because.
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
but I'm not necessarily limiting it. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's always tough being performance versus prescriptive. It's like-
Right.
Mm.
Engage
ready and engaged, yeah.
Okay.
Because the easiest way is to shift the hotel, but.
Not necessarily.
But not necessarily.
Okay.
Is there a way to say, even though, that relaxation of building setbacks and step backs, both at street wall height and over 75 feet, that, it be used judiciously and for cause, I guess, on a building specifically related to each building? Does that make sense? Like it's not a blanket.
That the applicant's requested variance for street wall setback be granted upon judicious use of building articulation and street wall activation.
On a per building?
On a per building basis.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one
I
more?
have one more, sorry, it's building on something else because that's how my brain works. So, to use your property or the property, part of your property to contribute to the public realm and pedestrian environment, for example, like we said, wider sidewalks, a minimum 15 feet, bike lanes, other public amenities,
The 15-foot would be,
at least.
we wouldn't be able to hit it in many places.
Well, where we can, I think we
What's
want
that?
that. Where we can, I think we want that in there. I think part of it is using some of the property, giving up some of the property for the public realm.
For example, along Oak, we have a huge buffer zone that would really allow most of the, you're already at 24 foot. So if those footprints currently have minimum lease depth of like 35 foot, and if we took out another 5 foot of those, you're not gonna get an office tenant to come in and take those buildings, for
I'm
example.
not talking about right there, I'm just
Yeah,
setting
I'm not
up.
trying to be a defiant, I'm just giving you,
Yeah.
for example, if that were to apply across the whole site, then
I don't think I said for it to apply across the
Okay.
whole site. I said in certain areas. Yeah.
As applicable with the conceptual master plan.
Right.
Mhm.
Can I speak to that? First Baptist Church, I'm Scott Hughes.
Do you mind? It's being recorded. I'm so sorry, sir.
Absolutely. You know, as a part of the, I mean, this is a 5-year process. We've been doing this for 5 years, trying to come up with something that makes sense. We've been very, very cognizant of how close this gets to the church, but also how we can provide an impact and positivity for the community. So for instance, we've already done some of that. There's an alleyway behind our sacred garden that will hopefully create walkability from Charlotte Street without having to go all the way down to the hotel to make that turn. So we're receptive to that, but keep in mind, we've already done a good bit of that in this whole design process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's still seconded.
Okay, so are we taking a vote on this one? Okay, so we'll take a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those in opposition? Okay, thank you.
Marathon session.
Yeah, I'll try to do this again in the future. I'm sorry about that. Get 10 Move to adjourn.
Yeah, adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
To adjourn?
She's already adjourned.
Thank you. See you next time.
I'm sorry.